Sumerian texts, unlike, for example, the Vedic texts, do not contain information about the creation of the universe as a whole. More precisely, they provide insights into the origin of everything, starting from the primordial Mother Namu, the cosmic abyss that holds within itself the mystery of life. Namu gave birth to An, the heavens, and Ki, the earth. These texts predominantly focus on the formation of the solar system and the cataclysms that took place within it. These cataclysms can be attributed to cosmic disasters, such as collisions between celestial bodies. The reality and frequency of such events can be judged by the countless impact craters covering the surfaces of planets and their moons. Scientists were able to observe the scale and impact of such phenomena by witnessing the fragments of the Shoemaker-Levy 9 comet colliding with Jupiter. The main event of the Sumerian cosmogony, worldview, and religion was called the Celestial Battle. It is described in great detail on 7 tablets. The most complete text has come down to us in Akkadian, the language of the Syrians and Babylonians who came to Mesopotamia in the 3rd millennium BC. The fact that the Sumerians, and later the Akkadians, attached great importance to this work is evident in the fact that it was recited at the Akitu, the spring equinox festivals. The texts of the Sumerian Epic of Creation and the Babylonian Enuma Elish, as can be judged from an unbiased reading, describe the formation of the solar system before the celestial battle and characterize the nature, causes, and results of the most dramatic event in the history of the planets known to us. To make the story more vivid, all the characters in this epic are personified and deified, which is generally characteristic of myths and legends. Edward Stone, senior scientist of the Voyager program from Caltech, along with other planetary scientists, claims that cosmic collisions are quite possibly the sculptors of the solar system. The Sumerians made similar claims at least 6,000 years ago. Until the discoveries made by the Voyagers, most scientists believed that the solar system, as we see it today, formed in the beginning according to the laws of celestial mechanics and gravity. Indeed, it is known that the structure of the solar system follows certain quantitative regularities. In the 18th century, mathematician D. Titius and astronomer J. Bode formulated an empirical rule that the distances of the known planets from the Sun adhered to. Johannes Kepler, 1571 to 1630, the father of celestial mechanics, also noted that there should be another planet between Mars and Jupiter. It was believed that this planet was, or could have been, at least twice the size of Earth. However, it was destroyed in a catastrophe, which Wilhelm Olbers predicted in 1804 when he foresaw the existence of such a celestial body and named it Phaeton posthumously. However, 2 problems arise here. The total amount of matter in the asteroid belt does not amount to the mass of such a planet. In fact, today it does not exceed a few hundredths of a percent of Earth's mass. There is no sufficiently coherent and satisfactory explanation for what could have caused the destruction of such a hypothetical planet. To better understand the issue, let's briefly examine the main concepts of planetary cosmogony developed by scientists over the past 200 years. The first hypothesis was officially published in the mid-18th century by the French naturalist Georges Buffon. He believed that a massive comet had once collided with the liquid body of the Sun. The resulting splashes after cooling formed the planets. Studies of the Sun and comets quickly ruled out this concept. Soon, a second, more convincing idea was put forward by I. Kant in 1755, later supplemented by mathematical calculations by P.S. Laplace in 1796. The essence of this idea was the gradual formation of a protoplanetary gas disk. The authors of this model believed that a gas nebula, as a result of rotation and gravitational effects, gradually contracted into a flat disk. Due to rotational instability during compression, circular rings formed, which, through further consolidation, became the planets. This hypothesis was considered the prevailing theory for about 100 years, but it had a difficult problem: the sharp discrepancy between the motion of the planets and that of the Sun. The Sun holds 99.9% of the system's mass, but its share of the total angular momentum is less than 2%. This means that, as part of a unified system, it should rotate 200 times faster than observed. In the mid-20th century, the main difficulties of this hypothesis were overcome. H. Alfvén, F. Hoyle, and E. Schatzman showed that the Sun's magnetic field, interacting with the ionized material of the gas nebula, could gradually transfer its angular momentum to the surrounding material. Thus, this hypothesis is still considered workable. The third model, proposed in the 1910s, utilized the phenomenon of tidal interactions between massive bodies. According to H. Jeffreys, J. Jeans, F. R. Moulton, and T. C. Chamberlain, a star passing near the Sun tore off a stream of matter from its depths, which, breaking into fragments, gave rise to the known planets. This hypothesis is essentially an echo of the first. The efficiency of such a planet formation mechanism is clearly very low, and the discovery of planets around nearby stars renders it obsolete. Moreover, the sharp differentiation of planets by chemical composition and the inconsistency of this composition with that of the Sun clearly indicates the error in the idea of stellar planet formation. The fourth model was developed by O. U. Schmidt and K. von Weizsäcker in 1944. It postulated the mechanical separation of a gas-dust cloud surrounding the Sun into solid particles and gaseous components. The fact that the planets closest to the Sun have a higher density is considered one of the logical arguments for this hypothesis. It is assumed that the rapid growth of initial condensation nuclei quickly led to the formation of numerous planetesimals, tiny protoplanets, which collided and attracted each other, sticking together into planets. Planetesimals of smaller order, revolving around planets, formed moons and moon systems. This hypothesis is the least contradictory, has the most supporters, and largely explains the observed regularities in the solar system. However, many mysteries and discrepancies still require significant refinement and additions to this model. In particular, over the past few decades, thanks to data from automated interplanetary stations, the idea of an uneven process of accretion of protoplanetary material and the undeniable existence of catastrophic events and processes has been confirmed. The understanding that numerous collisions have indeed altered the face of the solar system came after the Voyagers flew past Uranus. It turned out that not only is Uranus lying on its side with its axis, but its moons also rotate around the planet's equator in a plane that is perpendicular to the ecliptic. This led planetary scientists to seriously doubt that Uranus's moons could have had such orbits before the mysterious tilt of the planet's axis. It has been suggested that the moons formed after or during this event, possibly from material ejected from Uranus during a collision with whatever caused the axial tilt of the planet. After the scientific discussions, the journal Science published an article on July 4, 1986, by a group of 40 scientists who concluded that the moons of Uranus, with the exception of Miranda, are significantly denser than the icy moons of Saturn. This finding did not align with the accepted model of density differentiation within the solar system. Another unexpected discovery made by Voyager 2 was that two large inner moons of Uranus, Ariel, and Umbriel, with small rocky cores and thick ice shells, are less dense than the outer moons Titania and Oberon, which are primarily composed of dense rocky material with thin ice crusts. This observation contradicts current models that suggest denser bodies should form closer to the center of gravity. Such significant violations of physical principles led scientists to a radical conclusion. Some moons likely formed alongside their parent planets, while others may have formed elsewhere and were later captured. The next discovery that puzzled scientists was that the rings of Uranus turned out to be blacker than coal dust and were presumably composed of carbon-rich material, some form of primordial cosmic tar. Unlike Saturn's bright, icy rings, these dark rings are inclined to the planet's rotational plane and have an eccentric elliptical shape. Furthermore, the debris that makes up Uranus's rings orbits the planet in just 8 hours, twice as fast as Uranus's own rotation period. A simple mechanism for such acceleration is the collisions of celestial bodies. The 6 moons of Uranus discovered by spacecraft, which act as shepherds of the rings, also turned out to be dark in color. Alice Miner, a research assistant at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, commented on this discovery. It seems highly likely that some uninvited guest intruded into the Uranus system from outside and struck one of its once large moons with such force that it shattered it. Similarly, the well-known planetary scientist A. Ringwood suggested that Uranus collided with a celestial body with a mass approximately equal to Earth's, which tilted Uranus's axis by 98 degrees to the plane of the ecliptic and gave it retrograde rotation. The material for the formation of Uranus's moons was also ejected during this collision. At a NASA press conference, scientists were even more specific. This could be the result of a collision with something the size of Earth, traveling at a speed of about 18 kilometers per second, about 4 billion years ago. The Encyclopedia Britannica also explains the tilt of Uranus as the result of powerful collisions with large planetesimals. Finally, astronomer Harry Hunt from Imperial College London summed it up with the colourful remark, "A long time ago, Uranus got a hefty slap." Before the Voyager missions, Neptune was known to have two moons, Triton and Nereid. Triton is unusual in that it is the only natural planetary satellite with a retrograde orbit, inclined at 157 degrees to Neptune's equator. Nereid's orbit is also highly unusual, with a steep inclination of 28 degrees to Neptune's equatorial plane and an extreme eccentricity. Its distance from Neptune varies from 2 million to 10 million kilometers. In an article published in Nature on July 2, 1987, Martha and Bradley Schaefer concluded that Nereid grew into a satellite orbiting Neptune, or another planet, during the process of accretion, and both it and Triton were displaced into their strange orbits by another large object or planet. A group of scientists from the California Polytechnic Institute, writing in Science, claimed that Triton was pulled from its orbit as a result of a collision with one of Neptune's former satellites. The discovery that Pluto and its moon Charon also lie on their sides, made by James Christie of the U.S. Naval Observatory in June 1978, further supported the idea of collisions between celestial bodies reshaping the solar system. There are also many other mysteries and anomalies that cast doubt on the peaceful process of planet formation from a gas dust cloud. Where did these objects come from that caused the collisions? Rhetorically asked Gene Shoemaker from NASA. If we consider ancient Sumerian cosmological texts as a hypothesis for early cosmogony, they suggest that these events occurred when the solar system was still young. The original members of the system were the Sun, Apsu, its small companion Mercury, Mimu, and Tiamat. Apsu, existing from the beginning, Mumu, created, begotten, Tiamat, Lady of Life. Here is what is said about this in the Epic of Creation, when heaven above was not yet named, and the firm ground below had not yet been named, there was none but Apsu, the Sun, Mumu, Mercury begotten, and Tiamat, the mother of them all. Their waters were mingled together. Then the planetary family was gradually completed with three pairs: Venus and Mars between Mumu and Tiamat, the giants Jupiter and Saturn, and Uranus and Neptune. The phrase, "their waters were mingled together," is quite curious. It can be interpreted to mean that the proto-material from which the planets formed was rich in water and formed a cloud or disk. The formation of the gas giants was postponed to the third stage after the creation of Lahamu, Venus, Lady of Battles, and Lahmu, Mars, God of War. The similarity of the names of the planets and deities is not accidental. These are cognate male and female names. Venus and Mars had not yet grown to their proper size when the god Anshar, Saturn, and the god Kishar, Jupiter, were formed. As the days dragged on and the years multiplied, the god Anu, Uranus, became their son, rivaling his ancestors. Then Anu, the firstborn of Anshar, as an equal to himself, and in his own image begot Nudimud, Neptune. The Epic of Creation also tells of an emissary of Anshar, Gaga, the future Pluto, who made a long journey to other planets. Before the celestial battle, according to the Epic of Creation, there were 10 members of the solar system: the Sun and 9 planets: Mumu, Lahamu, Lahmu, Tiamat, Kishar, Anshar, Gaga, Anu, and Nudimud. Kingu is also mentioned, whom Tiamat exalted to the size of a planetary deity. and who was preparing to become the 10th planet with his own orbit. Here is a quote from the book of Isaiah that reveals the nuances of the Old Testament's act of creation and helps to better understand some important details of the process of forming the planetary collective, and later the creation and origin of life and humanity. For this is what the Lord says, He who created the heavens, He is God, who formed the earth and made it. He established it. He did not create it to be empty, but formed it to be inhabited and filled with life. From the Dictionary of Old Testament Words for English Readers, we learn that the term Bora implies the absolute sense of creation, of something previously non-existent, including creation from nothing, Genesis 1:1. The term Yatsar, to shape, to form, refers to the creation of something new from already existing material or substance, Genesis 2:22. Asa, to designate, to arrange, to equip, is not about creation, but rather about giving new meaning or purpose to something that already exists. This term is also found in Samuel 2:18 and Chronicles 4:35. Finally, kun or kum, to establish, to found, to raise, describes the establishment of something according to a plan or design. At first, the solar system was very unstable. The forming planets created tidal and orbital disturbances among their neighbors, including Tiamat. The divine brothers gathered together. They disturbed Tiamat, rushing like waves. They troubled Tiamat's womb with mischief in their celestial homes. Apsu, the sun, could not diminish their uproar. Tiamat remained silent in response to their pranks. Their deeds were detestable. Their ways brought confusion. They themselves knew no restraint. Modeling the past of the solar system with powerful computers, Richard Kerr concluded that chaos is found everywhere. Many orbits between Uranus and Neptune become disorderly and unpredictable, and Pluto's orbital movement is already completely chaotic and unpredictable. His opinion was supported by French researcher J. Lascar, who added that something originally brought disorder into the solar system, and this influence extended even to the terrestrial planets, including Earth. Naturally, the appearance of new planetary pairs destabilized the system further. The text speaks of the noise and commotion they caused, disturbing their progenitor, the sun. His loyal messenger tried to pacify them, but to no avail. Moreover, the primal mother Tiamat sought revenge on the other deities and wished to elevate her companion Kingu to the status of a god. In the Babylonian version of the text, instead of Nibiru, the figure of Marduk emerges, a young god trying to assert his position among the other planetary gods. It was he, with their consent, who undertook to restore order and confront the one-armed monster, Tiamat. As proven by scholars such as J. Smith, L. King, and others, the Enuma Elish was based on the Sumerian epic of creation. A comparison of the ideas and events presented in these epics proves extremely fruitful for explaining the cosmogony of the solar system and for understanding the further history of Earth and the development of life on it. Thus, about 4 billion years ago, a stranger, Nibiru, later renamed Marduk by the Babylonians, invaded the still unstable solar system. The fact that this occurred within our solar system is evidenced by the quote, "In Midmul, the planet Marduk, Nibiru appears." This stranger came from the outer cosmos, from the depths, as the ancient text states, but as it approached the outer planets of our system, it began to experience their gravitational influence. This likely happened during a planetary alignment. However, a similar scenario with the same result could have unfolded gradually. Nibiru, during its periodic visits to the solar system every few thousand years, could have approached the planets in stages. The first to draw it in was Neptune, Nudimud, or Ea, he whose home is water. As Nibiru approached Neptune, the side facing Neptune began to bulge, as if it had a second head. From the tidal bulge that formed, 4 winds were created, swirling around Nibiru like whirlwinds. These are named in the texts as the north wind, south wind, east wind, and west wind. It is also notable that Nibiru Marduk was often called the planet with 4 heads, sometimes leading to interpretations that identified Marduk as Jupiter. When Nibiru passed near Uranus, a few more new satellites were formed. Anu birthed and pushed forward 4 winds. This means that 4 large satellites of Uranus were formed during the collision that tilted Uranus's axis. At the same time, the ancient text states that Nibiru gained 3 new satellites as a result of this encounter. Nibiru's transition to a permanent heliocentric orbit led to its periodic return into the inner solar system, affecting the formation of the system's current appearance. It can be assumed that Nibiru initially had an orbit almost in the plane of the ecliptic. However, over time, its encounters with the gas giants likely distorted its orbit, causing it to incline significantly from the orbital planes of most planets. After passing Neptune and Uranus, Nibiru deviated from its original path and came under the more powerful gravitational influence of Saturn, An-Shah, Lord of the Heavens, and Jupiter, Kishar, Lord of the Firm Lands. When Nibiru approached and prepared for battle, the 2 planets joined in a kiss. It is likely that this final encounter permanently altered Nibiru's trajectory. During this same period, Saturn's main satellite Gaga set out with a message to the lower planetary gods, meaning it was drawn toward Mars and Venus. From the perspective of celestial mechanics, this could have been the result of Nibiru's retrograde motion. After tracing an elongated elliptical path, Gaga eventually returned to the outer reaches of the solar system and became the celestial body we know today as Pluto. Tiamat's large satellite, Kingu, Great Messenger, which had grown nearly to planetary size and was about to establish its own orbit around the Sun, posed a particular threat to the stability and peace of the other planets. As Sumerian texts state, Tiamat raised Kingu, among them the gods, she exalted him. She entrusted him with the command of battle. The invasion of the stranger introduced additional problems into an already complicated interplanetary situation. The other gods were also in turmoil, as if swept by a storm. It seems that Nibiru's orbital velocity was not very high. In any case, during the approach, or series of approaches, to the gas giants, Tiamat managed to give birth to 11 monsters. The text tells us the following. She raised a clamor in the assembly and raged with fury. She added to herself incomparable weapons, giving birth to monster gods. 11 of such she produced. From these gods she formed her council. She exalted Kingu, her firstborn, making him chief. She gave him the tablet of destinies and placed it firmly on his chest. Grouped together, they marched beside Tiamat, enraged, scheming day and night without cease. Interestingly, the text also mentions something that can easily be interpreted as the gravitational disturbance of Nibiru, Marduk's orbit, and that of its newborn satellites. His Nibiru's path was disrupted, his direction thrown off, his actions confused. When the gods, his companions marching beside him, saw the brave Kingu, their minds clouded. The text then lifts the veil on the drama that unfolded, a battle between Nibiru and its 7 satellites, with Tiamat and her army of 11 satellites led by Kingu. Nibiru and Tiamat themselves did not collide directly. However, the Maiden of Life and her satellites were struck by Nibiru's satellites, winds which literally translates from Sumerian as those who are near. He set forth 4 winds so that nothing of hers would be saved: the north wind, south wind, east wind, and west wind. Beside him he held his net, his grandfather Anu's gift, producing the evil wind, whirlwind, and storm. Nibiru attacked Tiamat with his net, which may signify a magnetic shield. Shooting at the planet with monstrous electric discharges, he also had at his disposal a powerful tidal force. The Lord raised a floodstorm, his mighty weapon. Tiamat let out a roar, and the foundations of her feet shook. She was filled with radiance, and wide cracks opened in her crust, possibly releasing steam and volcanic material. Into one of these widening cracks, mouths, Nibiru hurled one of his main satellites, called the Evil Wind. It tore through her womb, penetrated deep inside, and shattered her heart, the planet's core. The scale of this catastrophe can only be imagined. These were tangential and head-on collisions between celestial bodies with masses on the order of 10 to the power of 23 to 10 to the power of 26 kilograms. The kinetic energy released almost instantly during such impacts is at least 100 trillion times greater than the energy released by a megaton hydrogen bomb. This is also hundreds of thousands of times more energy than is released during all the earthquakes on Earth in a year. The celestial combatants inevitably fragmented into countless pieces and dust and partially vaporized. The temperature could have reached 5,000 to 6,000 degrees Celsius, similar to the temperature of the Sun's photosphere. This must have led to the remelting of the primary rocks. We will discuss this important stage in the history of Earth and asteroids in the next episode. In addition to the killing of Tiamat, this first encounter also decided the fate of her satellites, all except the planet-like Kingu. Caught in the net, magnetic and gravitational field of Nibiru, the broken, shattered members of Tiamat's host were thrown from their previous orbits onto new ones. When he had slain their leader, Tiamat, her belt of satellites was shattered into pieces. Her helpers, the gods who marched beside her, trembling with fear, turned back to save their lives. At the same time, the momentum of Nibiru's satellites significantly exceeded that of Tiamat's army, whose warriors shuddered, were afraid, and turned back, but were entangled and could not flee. A well-known example from classical mechanics is quite evident here. In a collision between two spheres, a massive sphere can cause the lighter one to reverse direction. Perhaps some primary comets were formed from the broken satellites composed of the substance of Tiamat's primordial ocean. However, in the collision-rich young solar system, they hardly survived longer than a few million years. Kingu, in essence, lost his independence. Nibiru took away his destiny, compressed him, and turned him into Duggar-E, a mass of lifeless dust, deprived of atmosphere, water, radioactive substances, reduced in size, and the chains that bound him, attached him to the fallen Tiamat. Sumerian texts leave no doubt that the stranger acquired a permanent orbit. He crossed the heavens and surveyed the expanses and measured the domains of Apsu, the sun. Having described an arc around the sun, Nibiru once again approached Neptune and Saturn. The elongated elliptical orbit returned him to the arena of the celestial battle. The Lord paused, gazing at her lifeless body, and wisely planned to divide the monster into parts and then split her in two, like a mussel shell. In the final part of the creation of the heavens, the creation of Earth and the Moon began. During the next close approach, Tiamat was split into two halves. Into her upper part, skull, crashed the North Wind, a satellite of Nibiru. This impact split the top of the skull, and as a result of the exchange of impulses, Tiamat and Kingu were transferred to a hidden place, to places unknown to them before, that is, to new orbits. The Lord trampled upon Tiamat, and with his weapon cut off her skull. He severed her blood vessels and commanded the north wind to carry her to places not known before. Perhaps this is how Earth and the Moon came into being. The upper part of Tiamat turned out to be shattered into many small fragments. This fragmented tail was bound together by the sun's gravity and became the celestial bracelet. Binding together the pieces, he stationed them like watchmen. He bent Tiamat's entourage into a curve to create the Great Band, resembling a bracelet. It seems that the Great Band refers to what we know today as the asteroid belt. Then Nibiru's attention turned to Neptune, and its appearance and system of satellites were brought to their modern state. In addition, according to the ancient text, Nibiru gave Gaga, Pluto, its final destiny, settling it in a secret place, a previously unoccupied part of the heavens, in the deep, that is, far from the sun. As an outer and newly formed planet, Gaga was then given a new name epithet, Usmu, the one who shows the way, likely because it is the first planet encountered upon entering the solar system. Thus, Pluto acquired its current orbit. The name of the corresponding planetary god, Isimud, can be translated as at the very end. In Akkadian, its equivalent Usmu means two-faced. Having thus created stations for the planets, Nibiru created two homes for himself. One was in the firmament of heaven, that is, in the asteroid belt. The other in the deep, called Ishara, abode, house of the ruler. In modern astronomy, this is known as perigee and apogee. Comparing the classical and Sumerian models of the solar system, leads to rather interesting results. In the first model, we include 9 objects, 8 planets, for obvious reasons without Pluto, and the asteroid belt. In the second model, we include 8 original planets of Sumerian cosmogony: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Tiamat, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. For convenience, their Mesopotamian names are also provided. Note that in this model, Earth is absent. A simple calculation shows that the progression coefficient is close not to 1.618 or 1.73, but to 1.9. If we take as a basis the coefficient of increasing the orbital radii of the most massive and therefore more stable planets in the range from the asteroid belt to Uranus, we get an average value of 1.93. If we expand the calculations from Venus to Neptune, the figure changes to 1.84. Thus, the number 1.9 can reasonably be considered a reference value. Here we also note that Earth and Pluto clearly fall out of the provided numerical series. In the model with a coefficient of 1.9, the discrepancies between the actual and calculated distances of the planets from the Sun turn out to be not only better than when calculated using the first 2 coefficients, but even slightly better than for the Bode-Titius progression. According to the empirical Bode-Titius rule, the average deviation for 8 planets and the asteroid belt is 5.6%. In the Sumerian model, this deviation for the 8 original planets is 4.3%. And in this case, Earth turns out to be superfluous, an astonishing fact. The observed shift of Mars toward Jupiter in this model can be explained by the relative proximity of the giant planets, Jupiter and Saturn, and the influence of Nibiru. Deviations from the progression for Uranus and Neptune may be associated with the influence of the giant planets, as well as collisions with Nibiru's satellites and gravitational perturbations from this planet. For the Bode-Titius model, the average error in complying with Kepler's third law is close to 2%. The average arithmetic error for the Sumerian model is 7%. Notably, the same 3 planets, Mars, Uranus, and Neptune, significantly disrupt the progression. However, it should be noted that this law merely reflects the mechanics of universal gravitation. Thus, Earth is not an essential element of the solar system, and there exists a model that does not require its presence at all. In it, the distances of the planets from the Sun are determined by a simple coefficient of 1.9. In the popular book by the Russian mystic Daniil Andreyev, The Rose of the World, the planet of the so-called middle layers of Shadana-Ka, formerly orbiting between Mars and Jupiter, is mentioned as Daya, which can be associated with Tiamat. As the author writes, Daya was physically transformed and disappeared from the world of Enroth. Its satellite underwent catastrophic disintegration. The asteroids are its fragments. Thus, we have come to understand that the hypothesis of the celestial battle is familiar not only to ancient texts, but also to the concepts of esoteric thinkers and the data of modern scientists. This cosmic drama significantly changed the appearance of the solar system and introduced a number of various anomalies. We will examine in detail the numerous pieces of evidence of this unique cataclysm. Book of Genesis. The first day. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Through him all things were made, without him nothing was made that has been made, in him was life. John 1:1-4. In 1902, British Museum expert Leonard King, in his book, The 7 Tablets of Creation Epic, showed that various fragments of this epic make up 7 parts, each containing 115 to 170 lines. The first 6 tablets are directly related to the process of creation. The 7th is entirely dedicated to the celebration of God, Marduk in the Babylonian version and Ash-Shur in the Assyrian version. Zechariah Sitchin suggests that this division into 7 tablets might have been the basis for the Babylonian and biblical stories of the first 7 days. 6 days of creation, the 7th for rest and reflection on what had been made. It's worth noting that the Hebrew word yom is used in the book of Genesis, which is translated as day. Creationists and evolutionists have clashed over this word countless times. Even among theologians, There's no agreement because the context and interpretation of this word in different parts of the Old Testament are quite contradictory. On one hand, from 2 Peter 3:8 and Hebrews 4:4, it follows that the day of God, or the seventh day, Yom, equals at least several thousand years. The Talmud reflects the same idea. According to theologians, this day began 6,000 years ago and continues to the present day. This suggests that the first 6 days might not have been 24-hour intervals. It's well known that day is a purely earthly concept, tied to the duration of one rotation of the Earth on its axis. For the omnipresent and almighty creator of the sun, stars, and planets, it would seem rather unbefitting to coordinate his large-scale actions across the universe with earthly days. On the other hand, in the seventh covenant with Moses, Exodus 28:10, there is a reference to the sacred Sabbath day, and in Genesis 1:5 and 2:2-3, Yom refers to an indeterminate duration of time or a day. Creationists insist that the process of creation no longer exists, and the world has been moving from its original order and perfection toward chaos. In their view, God's day of rest has continued for at least 6,000 years. Both the biblical and Mesopotamian versions of the book of Genesis begin at a time when earth and the heavens did not yet exist. However, while Sumerian cosmogony first describes the creation of the solar system and then the appearance of the heavenly deity Nibiru, the biblical version skips over these events and goes straight to the celestial battle and its aftermath. Let's recall how the Mesopotamian version begins. Enuma Elish la nabu shamamu shaplitu amatum shuma la zakrat. When the heavens above were not yet named, and the firm ground below had not been named, there was none but Apsu, the sun, begotten, Mumu, a Mercury, and the Lady of Life, Tiamat, mother of them all. Their waters were mingled together. It is important to note that in many translations of the Bible into different languages, there are often translation errors, leading to different interpretations of the same verses. This is well known to anyone who has done comparative studies. One such inaccuracy is the replacement of the word wind, ruach, with the term Spirit of God in Genesis 1. The literal meaning of this word is wind, but in the context of the Sumerian original, it refers to a companion, or the one who is nearby. Therefore, the phrase would more accurately be translated as, "A mighty wind passed over the surface of the waters of Tehom." What is significant, however, is that the Bible retains the meaning of abyss, chasm, for the Hebrew word Tehom, and today even theologians acknowledge that it is a direct borrowing of the Sumerian word Tiamat. Another curious detail can be found in Genesis 2:1, where it speaks of a certain host, which in the context of creation seems quite odd. Thus, the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their host. Similarly, Isaiah 45:12 mentions, "I made the earth and created mankind upon it. My own hands stretched out the heavens, I marshaled their host." What is this heavenly host? It seems this word survived the editing of Sumerian cosmogonical texts, which spoke of the hosts, companions, of Nibiru and Tiamat. If the heavenly host refers to celestial bodies moving according to the laws of celestial mechanics, then these heavenly bodies were indeed part of the celestial battle. Thus, the Bible Mesopotamian version, with the phrase about the surface of the waters of Tehom, takes on a literal rather than allegorical meaning. Both Tiamat and Earth after recreation were largely covered in water. If water was so abundant at the time of the celestial battle, it means that Earth was also a watery planet. The prophet Isaiah recalls the days of creation, 51:9-10, when the Almighty God, Nibiru, cut Rahab in pieces and pierced the sea monster, and dried up the waters of the mighty Tehom. In Isaiah 27, there is also mention of the sea monster, the fleeing serpent, and the crooked serpent, Leviathan, whom the Lord will punish with his fierce, great, and mighty sword. What was the wind of the Lord that swept over the surface of Tiamat's waters? The text makes it clear that this was not a divine spirit, but a companion of Nibiru, referred to in the Mesopotamian texts by the corresponding Sumerian term. As a result, this fragment of Genesis reads somewhat differently. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, still unformed, was void. Darkness reigned over Tiamat. When the wind, ruach of the Lord, passed over her waters, God said, "Let there be lightning." And a bright light appeared. The phrases, "and it was so, and God saw that it was good," are absent from the original and are considered additions by editors and compilers of the sacred texts. Let us recall that in Enuma Elish, Tiamat is described as a mother who gave birth to a host of 11 companions, led by Kingu, whom she exalted. When Nibiru approached, Tiamat let out a furious cry, trembling to her core, and continuously sent curses upon him. When the Lord spread his net to ensnare her and hurled the evil wind into her face, Tiamat opened her mouth to swallow him, but then the other winds of Nibiru attacked her belly and inflated her body. Piercing Tiamat's insides, the invader brought her to her knees and killed her. A vivid description of a battle between two living beings. For a long time, viewing Earth as a living organism was considered a relic of paganism. One of the first to suggest that Earth was a living superorganism was James Hutton, 1790. The father of geological science, he saw Earth as a living organism and even proposed physiological approaches to study it. In the 1930s to 40s, V.I. Vernadsky and E. Bauer, and later James Lovelock in the 1970s, developed the idea that Earth and everything on it evolves as a single organism. Lovelock called Earth itself the largest living organism, echoing the ancient Greeks' idea of Mother Earth, Gaia. The aforementioned quotes from Isaiah 51:10 and Psalms 76:17-20, 88, 11-12, as well as from Job 26:7-14, indicate that the ancient Jews were familiar with the full version of these texts. Job recalled how the heavenly Lord struck the helpers of Rahab, and praises the Lord who, coming from deep space, shattered Tiamat, thereby altering the appearance of the solar system. Here is a direct translation from Hebrew by Zechariah Sitchin and a parallel text of the canonical translation. He stretched a crafted canopy over the place of Tihom, Tiamat of earth, suspended in the void. He bound the waters in their density without the sound of thunder. His forces captured her waters, his energy shattered the magnificent one, his wind measured the forged bracelet, his hand destroyed the writhing dragon. It is noteworthy that Job also includes the mysterious phrase, "and how little we have heard of him." The traditional understanding of the events described in the Epic of Creation, Enuma Elish, and the Book of Genesis often led to misinterpretation. If the Sumerian text refers, as we see, to the cosmogony of the solar system, then several thousand years later, the text had significantly changed. Here's how it appears in the Old Testament version. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God, Ruach, was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. The Mesopotamian texts then describe how Nibiru formed the asteroid belt from the lower half of Tiamat. He placed her other half as a heavenly shield. Binding the pieces together, he placed them like sentinels. He bent the entourage of Tiamat into an arc to create the great band like a bracelet. The Book of Genesis 1:6-8 in the Hebrew translation also describes the formation of the asteroid belt, but it reads as follows: "And God said, Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And God called the firmament heaven." The information provided by the Sumerian texts was confirmed only in recent years. Until Galileo's discovery of Jupiter's moons in 1610, the idea that celestial bodies could have moons seemed impossible to scientists. Yet in the Sumerian texts, we read that Nibiru's gravitational pull first interacted with Neptune, and then with Uranus. Uranus acquired 4 new moons, while the newcomer took 3 moons, winds, for itself. By the time Nibiru approached Tiamat, it had 7 winds to attack Tiamat, while Tiamat, as we remember, had formed an army of 11. The Mesopotamian texts, and partly the biblical version, not only report the formation of the asteroid belt, but also insist that such a bracelet of debris is located between Mars and Jupiter. Until the 19th century, astronomers were unaware of this. The first and largest known asteroid, Ceres, was discovered by Giuseppe Piazzi on January 1, 1801. Its distance from the Sun matched the Titius-Bode law, but its size was quite modest, about 935 kilometers in diameter. In 1702, Wilhelm Olbers discovered Pallas, diameter 608 kilometers, at the same distance from the Sun. Over the next 4 years, Juno and Vesta were discovered. By the mid-19th century, 20 asteroids were known. 50 years later, the count had reached 500. Today, there are about 30,000 known asteroids, of which 7,000 have been assigned numbers. It is estimated that there are approximately 500,000 asteroids in the belt, with diameters of 1.5 kilometers or larger. There are about 250 million objects up to 1 kilometer in size, and billions of even smaller ones. It is important to note that the distribution of asteroids by mass is not random but follows the law of the random fragmentation of a large body into many parts. Furthermore, some of the smaller planets have a significant inclination of their orbits to the plane of the ecliptic. Consequently, there are grounds to consider the asteroid belt not as an unformed planet due to the influence of Jupiter, but as a once existing planet that was destroyed in a cosmic catastrophe. The Sumerian original helps us understand the meaning of the words in the previous episode about the firmament, heavenly vault, heavens, which separated the waters from the waters, and surface, those below the heavenly firmament. From the perspective of physics, this is clearly inconsistent because, with low clouds and fog, the heavenly firmament should rest directly on the earthly firmament. Moreover, clouds form at various altitudes since water vapor exists in almost all layers of the atmosphere, and 2- or 3-layer cloud cover is quite common. The editors of Genesis, understanding that the Jewish word shamayim is used to denote both divine heavens and the sky, provide some details about the two concepts of heavens created as a result of the destruction of Tiamat. In Genesis, it is emphasized that what separated the upper waters from the lower waters was the rakia. This is usually translated as heavenly vault, but the literal meaning of this term is forged bracelet. Further in Genesis, it is explained that the Lord then called the rakia shamayim. Shamayim, in its first biblical use, consists of 2 words, sham and ra'im, which literally means where the waters were. In the creation story, according to Genesis, heaven refers to a specific place in the sky where Tiamat and her waters once existed and where the asteroid belt was forged. The biblical phrase, about the forged bracelet, shamarim or heavens, which separated the waters under the heavenly vault from the waters above the heavenly vault, puzzled many. Now we know that the asteroid belt, as claimed in ancient texts, divided the planets into 2 groups, terrestrial, inner planets, and giant planets, outer gas and water planets. The fact that water should be present throughout the solar system can be inferred from the known ratio of atoms in the universe. Silica forms the basis of the crust of 5 planets and many moons. However, for every silicon atom, there are 24 oxygen atoms. And in space, hydrogen is approximately 1,000 times more abundant than oxygen. Hence the high probability of reactions forming water. Here are some data on the presence of water on the surfaces and in the interiors of planets and their moons. The Sun and inner planets. The Sun is a giant ball of hot, dense plasma. It is 330,000 times more massive than Earth and has a surface temperature of about 5,800 degrees Celsius. It hardly seems like a candidate for containing water, even hypothetically. This was the prevailing belief until the mid-1990s. In 1995, a group of astrophysicists from the Kitt Peak Observatory, Arizona, led by Lloyd Wallace, discovered water molecules in sunspots. In the summer of 1997, Peter Bernath, a chemist from the University of Waterloo, also obtained irrefutable evidence of water vapor in sunspots, which have temperatures of about 3,000 to 3,300 degrees Celsius. An article on this topic was published in the journal Science. We recall that the waters of the Sun and planets were once mixed together, making this discovery seem quite natural. Mercury, one might think, is also in too hot a situation due to its proximity to the Sun and is too small to retain water at its surface, even if it once existed there. However, radio probing of the polar regions of this planet in the early 1990s revealed numerous hidden ice deposits ranging from 50 to 150 kilometers in size. This indicates the presence of an atmosphere and a more watery past. By the way, Mercury's surface, which overall is very similar to the Moon's, is dotted with numerous impact craters, including some truly enormous ones, such as the Sea of the Plains of Heat, located in the northern hemisphere of the planet. Venus. The creation of radar topographic maps from data provided by the Pioneer and Venus space missions led a group of scientists to conclude that Venus might once have been covered by a layer of water with an average thickness of about 10 meters. In an article in Science on May 7, 1982, it was concluded that there used to be much more water on Venus than there is today in the form of vapor. Subsequent studies suggested that the ancient water formed clouds of sulfuric acid and also oxidized the rocky surface of the planet. In a joint article by American and Soviet scientists published in Science 4 years later, it was once again claimed that the lost Venusian oceans are visible in its rock formations. Professor David Grinspoon from the University of Colorado also shares this view. He believes that 4 billion years ago, the climate conditions on this planet were fundamentally different. However, under the influence of the greenhouse effect, the water gradually dissolved into Venusian basalts, which still contain no less than 1% water. Volcanism, which supplied water vapor into the atmosphere, was active on Venus between 1.5 and 1 billion years ago. Venus features mountains as high as 11 kilometers, volcanoes up to 4 kilometers tall, and impact craters with diameters of 9 to 50 kilometers. Radar images obtained by the Venus 15 and Magellan missions revealed a strange meandering channel in the Atlantida Basin, 6,750 kilometers long and 1.75 kilometers wide. The origin of this and other shorter channels cannot yet be explained by lava flows. The Venusian atmosphere today is 96% carbon dioxide, CO2, and about 4% nitrogen, which means that a massive amount of oxygen is chemically bound. The Moon. Until quite recently, the Moon was considered dry. However, radar data obtained by the American space probe Clementine pointed to the presence of subsurface ice deposits in the polar regions of the Moon. This unexpected conclusion by experts from the U.S. Department of Defense sparked fierce objections from some scientists. The debates only ended after further research was conducted using the Lunar Prospector mission. Water exists on the Moon, and there are plans to use it for future lunar bases. Current estimates suggest that there may be up to 6 billion tons of water ice near the lunar poles, enough to support a settlement of several thousand people for hundreds of years. These ice deposits cover an area of about 2,000 square kilometers and appear to consist of layers or lenses of pure ice. Mars. The giant volcanoes of Mars testify to its turbulent geological past. The planet itself is smaller than Earth, but surpasses it in geological features. The age of numerous large impact craters covering the southern regions of the planet is estimated by specialists to be 3 to 4 billion years old. The largest of these is the Hellas Basin, with a diameter of about 1,600 kilometers. There are also many volcanoes on Mars. 2 vast zones rich in volcanoes can be found in the northern hemisphere. The largest Martian volcano, Olympus, is comparable in size to a small country. Its caldera is more than 50 kilometers in diameter. Olympus rises 25 kilometers above the surrounding plain. The diameter of the crater exceeds 72 kilometers, and Olympus is not the only giant. There are also shield volcanoes such as Arsia, 18 kilometers tall, Pavonis, 17 kilometers tall, and others. Given the presence of volcanoes, it can be speculated that phenomena such as geysers and streams, both above and below ground, do exist. Logically, such places are where the search for subsurface life would make sense. Regarding Martian canyons like Valles Marineris, the famous American Grand Canyon would look like a modest ditch in comparison. 1.6 kilometers deep versus 6.4 kilometers and 29 kilometers wide versus 240 kilometers respectively. In 1971, the Mariner 9 space probe transmitted images of canyons and dry riverbeds, along with pictures of volcanoes. Renowned American geologist Harold Masursky, studying these photos, concluded that water played an active role in the evolution of this planet. Many photos show deep, meandering channels, which were undoubtedly once fast-flowing streams of water. We are simply forced to conclude that we are observing the manifestations of water's impact. The existence of extensive bodies of water is indirectly indicated by vast deserts with wandering dunes. Under the influence of water, the erosion of rock formations occurs relatively quickly, leading to the formation of sand. The Viking data also support this, showing that the chemical nature of the Martian soil is similar to hydrated clay nontronite, which has undergone significant erosion. The thickness of frozen soils in the equatorial region is about 1.5 kilometers, while the thickness of the polar ice caps reaches 5 kilometers. The correlation between the distribution of craters on the surface and fluidized ejecta allows scientists to conclude that the icy and frozen layers increase in thickness from the equator to the poles. The thickness of frozen soils in the equatorial region is about 1.5 kilometers, while the thickness of the polar ice caps reaches 5 kilometers. The correlation between the distribution of craters on the surface and fluidized ejecta allows scientists to conclude that the icy and frozen layers increase in thickness from the equator to the poles. The permafrost layer contains about 100 times more ice than the Martian polar caps. According to some estimates, Mars has 2.5 times more ice than Earth. Ultraviolet measurements have shown that about 400 tons of water evaporates from the planet's surface daily. In 1997, Martian clouds were photographed by the Mars Global Surveyor. A report by the American Geophysical Union in 1977 stated that in the distant past, powerful torrents carved the Martian landscape in several places. The volume of water released was equivalent to Lake Erie, and the movement of these colossal water masses created vast channels. The Viking 2 lander discovered permafrost at the landing site, a mixture of soil, water ice, and frozen carbon dioxide. American scientists W. Hacker and R. Strom concluded that during a later geological epoch, the Martian ocean could have filled with water and dried up multiple times. In the past, the southern polar cap extended to 40 degrees south latitude. The issue of water in Mars' polar caps was discussed at the Second International Colloquium on Mars, held in January 1979 at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena. Reports indicated that the northern cap consists of water ice, though not the southern one. According to NASA reports, Mars once had enough water to cover its entire surface with a layer tens to hundreds of meters thick. At two conferences on Mars, held in Washington under NASA's leadership in July 1986, scientists expressed the opinion that enough water is hidden in Mars' crust to theoretically flood the entire planet with an ocean at least 300 meters deep. Images from the Mars Pathfinder in July 1997 convinced planetary scientists that about 1 billion years ago a flood occurred at the landing site of the station. The water from this event would have been enough to fill the Mediterranean Sea. It is also worth noting that Mars's axis of rotation is tilted at an angle similar to Earth's, meaning that every 50,000 years the planet's climate changes significantly. As for the atmosphere of Mars, it may have been much denser in the past. It is believed that about 5% of the early atmosphere was provided by comets, while volcanism accounted for 20 to 50%. The high oxygen content in the oxides of Martian soil suggests that oxygen may have existed in free form in the past. Outer planets. Jupiter system. Jupiter is 1,313 times larger than Earth. Its average density is 1.33 grams per cubic centimeter, and it contains 90% of the mass of all the planets. The Sumerians, as we recall, called it Kishar. Kishar, Lord of Solid Lands. It is believed that in its early stages, Jupiter and Saturn were icy rocky bodies with a mass of about 10 Earth masses. This mass was sufficient to attract gases from the surrounding protoplanetary disk, significantly increasing the size of the planets located approximately in the center of the solar system. Jupiter was explored by the Pioneer, Voyager, and Galileo missions in the 1970s to 1990s. Its composition is similar to that of Saturn, and the ratio of helium to hydrogen is close to that of the Sun, 24%. The Sun has 25%. The Galileo probe, which studied the upper layers of Jupiter's ionosphere and atmosphere in 1996, transmitted data showing that Jupiter has a radiation belt 10 times more powerful than Earth's, at an altitude of 50,000 kilometers above its cloud layer. Jupiter's magnetic field is the most intense in the solar system after the Sun's. Wind speeds of 100 to 180 meters per second have been recorded. In Jupiter's extensive and incredibly turbulent atmosphere, water vapor has been detected, although the descending probe recorded much less water than expected, about 0.002% in the upper atmosphere. However, this misunderstanding was quickly explained by the fact that the Galileo probe landed in a dry region of the planet. As noted in the Galileo scientific team's press release on June 5, 1997, infrared observations suggest that water content is at least 100 times higher. The transparent ring discovered around Jupiter by the Voyagers in 1979 is composed entirely, or almost entirely, of ice particles. Jupiter has at least 16 moons, one of which is larger than Mercury, and 3 are larger than Earth's moon. The closest moon, Io, has been found to have volcanic activity, with more than 30 volcanoes spewing molten material containing water and multicolored gas fountains up to 300 kilometers high. Such intense volcanic activity has yet to be fully explained and cannot be attributed solely to natural radioactive and gravitational heating. Io's orange-red surface consists of vast plains cut by depressions, seemingly created by flowing water. Scientists have concluded that Io has some internal source of water. The mass of its metallic core is about 25% of the Moon's total mass. Europa has the smoothest surface in the solar system, and its lower density compared to Io suggests that a watery ocean exists beneath it. Europa's surface is crisscrossed with vein-like reddish lines, 20 to 40 kilometers wide and thousands of kilometers long, which NASA researchers attribute to cracks in the frozen ocean. This hypothesis is supported by the almost complete absence of craters on the surface, as water likely quickly heals them. This moon also has a fairly massive metallic core. The surface of Ganymede, the largest moon of Jupiter, consists of a mixture of water ice and rocky material. It is believed that the moon is almost entirely composed of water and ice. Callisto, similar in size to Mercury, has an ice-rich crust. Estimates suggest that this moon is composed of 40% water. Callisto's surface is nearly entirely covered with impact craters. One major feature is a network of dozens of concentric ridges, palimpsests, in Valhalla, with a diameter of 4,000 kilometers. It is believed that these ridges were caused by an impact with a large asteroid, forming a crater with a radius of about 2,000 kilometers, which was later filled with water from Callisto's interior. The palimpsest Asgard, with a diameter of 1,600 kilometers, is also well known. Saturn system. Saturn is a gas giant with an extensive atmosphere of hydrogen and helium and a low average density, 0.69 grams per cubic centimeter, with a volume 766 times that of Earth. Its most remarkable feature is its enormous shimmering ring, which has a diameter of 270,000 kilometers and a thickness of about 100 meters. Saturn has 18 known moons. The Sumerians called this giant Anshar, Lord of the Heavens. Although the planet's composition is not yet fully understood, both the rings and many of the moons consist largely, if not entirely, of water ice, or possibly liquid water. For instance, Pioneer 11 in 1979 and Voyager 1 and 2 in 1980 to 1981 confirmed earlier assumptions that the rings consist of ice chunks, ranging in size from boulders to small houses. Pioneer 11 and later Voyager 1 in 1980 provided evidence that Saturn's inner moons, Janus, Mimas, Enceladus, Tethys, Dione, and Rhea, are mainly icy bodies. Interestingly, Mimas, despite its small size, about 200 kilometers, has a crater more than 100 kilometers across. It is believed that this crater was formed by an almost catastrophic collision with a small comet. Information about Saturn's outer moons from the Voyager missions was similar. Iapetus was found to be an ice boulder with a small rocky core. Analyzing the data, von Eschleman of Stanford University concluded that Iapetus is composed of 55% ice, 35% rock, and 10% frozen methane. There are indirect signs of oil-like products on Iapetus's surface. Titan is larger than Mercury and has a denser atmosphere than Earth's. Its surface is rich in hydrocarbons, oil, and its predominantly nitrogen atmosphere contains organic substances that give the clouds a dark red color. Beneath the surface lies a mantle of frozen ice, followed by, presumably, liquid water, methane, ethane, and a rocky core. The composition of Titan is 85% water and ice and 15% rock. Let us note an important fact here. The large masses of Jupiter and Saturn, and consequently their high escape velocities, prevent the escape of material from these planets into space. This follows the principle: for whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. Matthew 13:12. Differentiation of materials in the planet's interiors during evolution could very well have led to the veiling of water, which undoubtedly must be present in large quantities. It is significant that many of the details reported by the Sumerians about the planets could only be verified recently, in the last centuries or even decades, and they turned out to be correct. Let us consider two more examples as we move further from the Sun. Uranus was discovered by William Herschel in 1781. Voyager 2 flew past it in 1986. This planet has a greenish-blue color, and its surface is a watery ocean. The abundance of water on planets once thought to be gaseous, as well as on their moons, was a complete surprise to astronomers. Uranus, we recall, lies on its side, as if the influence of a celestial body had tilted its axis almost into the plane of the ecliptic. Uranus also has icy rings, 10 of them, with parameters that have undermined the model that relied on so-called shepherd moons. The wind speeds in its atmosphere range from 110 meters per second at the equator to 200 meters per second at a latitude of 55 degrees. According to NASA astronomers, Miranda, a moon of Uranus, is one of the most mysterious objects in the solar system. Its flat plateau is crisscrossed by a 170-kilometer-long ridge that forms a right angle. This feature has been named chevron by astronomers. As mentioned, the Sumerians referred to Uranus with the epithet mash-sig, light greenish. They also called it Kakab Shanama, the planet that is the twin of Neptune. Uranus is indeed almost identical to Neptune in size, 25,500 kilometers and 24,700 kilometers respectively, mass 15 and 17 Earth masses, color, density 1.3 and 1.8, 1.6 grams per cubic centimeter, and water content. Both planets are surrounded by rings and have many moons, 21 and 8 respectively. There are also similarities in the intensity of their magnetic fields, their rotation periods, 16 and 17 hours, and the unusually large tilt of their magnetic axes, 58 degrees for Uranus and 50 degrees for Neptune. Finally, the temperatures of both planets are almost the same. Here is a quote from the New York Times. "Neptune looks almost like a twin of Uranus." John Wilford. The Encyclopedia Britannica says Uranus and Neptune are practically twins. Neptune was discovered on September 23, 1846, as if at the tip of a pen. It was actually observed by E. Gallet, but based on calculations made by J. Leverrier and J. Adams. The Sumerians described Neptune as bluish-green and watery. Science only became aware of such details at the end of the 20th century, in the late 1980s. The bluish color of the planet is attributed to methane in its atmosphere, which intensely absorbs red light. In 1612, Galileo had unknowingly observed Neptune near Jupiter. The mystery of Neptune is that it emits far more heat than it receives from the Sun. Neptune receives 2.5 times less energy from the Sun than Uranus, yet the effective temperatures of both planets are almost the same, 59.3 Kelvin and 59.1 Kelvin respectively. The reason for this anomaly is unknown. The wind speeds on Neptune are monstrous, up to 300 to 700 meters per second, twice the speed of sound. Powerful pulsating storms in the form of huge dark spots arise in its northern hemisphere. Observations and research by Voyager 2 in 1989 proved that the planet has a small rocky core surrounded by, according to scientists at JPL, a mixture of water and water ice. Previously, it had long been believed that all the giant planets were made of gas. Neptune has at least 8 moons. The largest of them is Triton, almost the size of our moon. In Voyager 2's photographs, it appears as a bluish moon. This color, once again, is due to the presence of methane in the atmosphere. Triton has a pinkish-gray surface with rugged mountainous terrain on one side and smooth, almost craterless areas on the other. Triton is the 5th celestial body in the solar system, after Earth, the Moon, Venus, and Io, on which volcanic and geyser activity has been recorded. Eruptions send material up to 8 to 10 kilometers into the atmosphere. Like all the giant planets, Neptune has rings, at least 4. They have a very unusual structure and resemble twisted ropes. NASA reports that Neptune has dark stripes and patches with lighter halos, and deep water expanses with mud-like liquid organic material. As noted earlier, the Sumerians described Neptune as bluish-green, watery, and striped with the color of marsh vegetation, which matches the data from space missions exactly. These and other details leave no doubt that someone observed these celestial bodies from close range. In one text, even the distances between planets are mentioned. Additionally, this observer was able to model the entire process of the solar system's formation in the distant past. The similarity in the description of these two planets by NASA scientists and ancient Sumerians is literal. Twin planets, almost twins of Neptune. These two planets are almost twins. And yet, Sumerian texts describing the blue-green twins, Uranus and Neptune, are dated to at least 4000 BC, meaning they predate modern data by 6,000 years. Pluto, the most distant planet known to official science, bears no resemblance to a giant planet. Its mass is 5 times less than Earth's, and its density is 1.9 grams per cubic centimeter. The planet consists of ice, silicates, and organic compounds. A year on Pluto lasts 247.69 Earth years. Its orbit is highly inclined to the plane of the ecliptic, 17 degrees, and very elongated, so much so that Pluto dips deep inside Neptune's orbit. Before the discovery of Pluto's moon, Charon, this planet was thought to be a former moon of Neptune. This idea was based, in particular, on the similarity in the chemical composition, size, density, and orbital period of Pluto, 6.4 days, and Neptune's moon Triton, 5.9 days. British astronomers J. Dormand and M. Wolfson hypothesized that a close encounter between these celestial bodies caused Pluto to be ejected from Neptune's system, while Triton acquired its retrograde orbit. According to T. Van Flandern and R. Harrington, Pluto was pulled from its orbit by some unknown massive planet. The ratio of Charon's mass to Pluto's, about 1 to 6, also turned out to be anomalous. Thus, it seems that the mysterious biblical phrase about the firmament, which separated the waters from the waters, indeed referred to the division of the planets into 2 groups, inner and outer. Water existed in both regions, as confirmed by the latest space mission research. Traces of a heavenly battle, comets and asteroids. Astronomers and planetary scientists believe that the solar system formed from a protoplanetary gas dust cloud. In this regard, the characteristics of the planet's rotation, having formed within a unified system, should generally be similar. Indeed, most planetary orbits lie approximately in the same plane. In addition, the planets, seemingly retaining their initial direction of rotation, revolve around the Sun and around their axes, counterclockwise when viewed from the northern hemisphere. The same goes for the satellites of planets and various cosmic debris. This type of motion is called direct or prograde. As a rule, all these bodies rotate around their axes counterclockwise. 6 planetary satellites, Triton and Phoebe of Saturn, and 4 distant satellites of Jupiter, and 3 planets, Pluto, Uranus, and Venus, violate this rule, with the orbital planes of the satellites of the first 2 planets having a large inclination to the ecliptic. It is unsurprising that, as a foreign body in the solar system, Nibiru did not conform to these parameters. Its newly formed orbit was retrograde, meaning this planet moved clockwise. Pluto, Gaga, likely due to the influence of Nibiru, moves in an elongated orbit inclined to the ecliptic by 17 degrees. This may indirectly suggest that Nibiru's orbit also has some inclination to the ecliptic. Naturally, this intruder must have significantly influenced the observable properties of smaller bodies in the solar system. 2 main scenarios for the formation of comets are considered most plausible today. The first scenario views comets as primordial products of the accretion, compression, of dense molecular clouds into particles covered with organic molecules. The compression of such a cloud around the proto-sun could have led to the formation of the solar system. The second scenario suggests the independent and simultaneous formation of protoplanetary disks from dust and ice particles. Under the influence of solar heat and radiation pressure, the planetesimals, embryonic planets, closer to the Sun, lost their volatile components to a greater extent and became the material for the terrestrial planets. Lighter particles and gases concentrated in the regions of the giant planets' orbits. However, some of this material may have formed a vast layer of cometary bodies, located beyond the zone of the Sun's thermal influence but gravitationally bound to it. Most short and medium-period comets and asteroids move in proper orbits. However, what's interesting is that as the period of a comet's orbit increases, so does the number of comets with improper orbits. For long-period comets, the ratio of prograde to retrograde orbits reaches about 1:1. This suggests that some unknown effect or celestial body is throwing comets into the solar system from outside. Surprisingly, some well-known comets today, including Halley's Comet, also move in elongated retrograde orbits inclined to the ecliptic. Medium-period comets, with orbital periods ranging from 20 to 200 years, and short-period comets, with periods less than 20 years, have an average inclination angle to the ecliptic of 18 degrees. Therefore, in terms of their orbits, comets do not behave like original members of the solar system. Accordingly, many researchers tend to believe that their source lies farther from the Sun and planets, on the outskirts of the system. First, they hypothesize the existence of the so-called Kuiper belt, believed to contain around 1 million cometary nuclei. Considered unused building material of the solar system, it is located just beyond Pluto's orbit. There is little direct evidence of its existence so far. Only one icy object, 1993 FW, has been discovered in this region, with a diameter of about 200 kilometers. Of course, it can be assumed that the number of such objects will increase over time. Some estimate up to 10,000. But does the existence of such asteroids and comets contradict the Nibiru plus solar system model? Not at all. Many astronomers consider the second and primary source of comets to be the so-called Oort cloud. It is thought to contain up to 1 trillion cometary bodies, located at distances between 10,000 and 50,000 astronomical units from the Sun. On the other hand, some comets, such as Comet Hale-Bopp, have a cyanogen ratio similar to that in the interstellar medium. This also supports the idea of comets invading from outside. However, this model has opponents. Astronomer Martin Duncan from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, believes that the Oort cloud formed within the solar system, somewhere in the region between Jupiter and Neptune. His computer modeling shows that over 1 billion years, a vast number of cometary bodies in that region were gravitationally captured and destroyed or ejected to the outskirts of the planetary system by the giant planet's gravity. In addition, there is a hypothesis about the existence of spiral galactic streams rich in cometary material through which the solar system regularly passes, capturing some comets along the way. Research by scientists at the Harvard-Smithsonian Observatory led by the renowned comet expert Brian Marsden, established that of the 200 comets with periods of more than 100 years, only one was observed to have a period of more than 200 years than 250 years. Only less than 10% came into the solar system from outside. 90% of comets have always belonged to the Sun, with the Sun being at the focus of their orbits. Fred Whipple, in his book The Mystery of Comets, noted that if comets indeed come from deep space, we would expect them to move at much higher speeds than 0.8 kilometers per second, which we do not observe. He concluded that, with some exceptions, all comets belong to the solar family and are gravitationally bound to it. Jan Oort, the author of the canonical idea of the cometary cloud surrounding the solar system, made some interesting revisions to his initial hypothesis based on new facts. In the Bulletin of the Astronomical Societies of the Netherlands, he wrote, "It seems more likely that comets formed not in distant regions of the solar system, but were born somewhere among the planets. The most natural connection would be with minor planets, asteroids. There is evidence that these two classes of objects, comets and asteroids, belong to the same kind. It seems reasonable to assume that comets arose simultaneously with the minor planets." Indirect support for these words comes from the recent discovery of asteroid-like comets, displaying characteristics of both types of celestial bodies, as well as the fact that comets occupy a chemical niche between primitive meteorites and interstellar material. The unusual properties of comets have often led to the creation of quite exotic hypotheses. For example, prominent Ukrainian comet researcher S. Kiev-Seksviatsky believed that comets erupt during explosive processes occurring on the moons of giant planets. V. A. Atsukovsky, a proponent of the ether dynamics theory, connects the mechanism of comet formation to non-stationary aerodynamic phenomena occurring on planets and their moons. A major study on this subject was published in 1978 by Thomas Van Flandern, Naval Observatory, Washington. He developed an idea proposed in the 19th century. Asteroids and comets originated from the explosion of a planet. Citing the works of Oort, Van Flandern summarized, "Even the father of the modern theory of the cometary cloud, based on the data available at the time, concluded that the origin of comets within the solar system, in connection with the phenomenon that gave rise to the asteroid belt, remains the most viable hypothesis." In his work, he also referred to the research of Canadian astronomer Michael Ovenden, who formulated the principle of minimum interaction in 1972. Based on this, he suggested that, between Mars and Jupiter, about 10 million years ago, there existed a planet 90 times more massive than Earth, which was destroyed. Of course, a significant portion of the asteroids and comets were eventually captured by Jupiter. This, wrote Ovenden, is the only way to meet the requirements that the cosmogonic theory must be able to produce both retrograde and prograde motions of celestial objects. However, there is one caveat. The mass of known asteroids and comets is significantly less than Earth's mass, and does not approach the 90 Earth masses that Ovenden assumed. Asteroids mainly occupy the spatial interval between 1.8 and 4 astronomical units, and have a rotation period of 3 to 6 years. About 95% of these small planets are located between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. However, some penetrate within the orbits of Mars, Venus, and even Mercury. A small part of the asteroid family is located between Jupiter and Saturn. The relatively recently discovered asteroid 2060 Chiron is located between Saturn and Uranus, 13.6 astronomical units. Over the past few years, more than 30 small celestial bodies beyond Neptune's orbit have been discovered, with diameters exceeding 100 kilometers. Scientists estimate that there are 70,000 of them in that region. The significant number of asteroids in the area where Nibiru collided with Neptune and Uranus seems quite logical. It is also known that some planetoids get caught in so-called gravitational traps, resonating with the orbits of nearby planets. Furthermore, there are voids between groups of asteroids, known as Kirkwood gaps. For example, at distances of 2.50 and 2.84 astronomical units, there are no small planets with corresponding orbital semi-major axes. The latest theories suggest that the planetoids once located there were ejected into outer space, leaving only those that were locked by the gravity of the outer planets, mainly Jupiter. However, this assumption does not explain the deficit of asteroids in the 3.5 to 3.9 astronomical units range, as the gravitational disturbances from this giant planet are minimal in that area. Yet this region is located precisely along the supposed orbital path of Nibiru. Like comets, some asteroids have orbits that are highly inclined to the ecliptic plane. Several relatively large small planets have an inclination angle of 25 to 30 degrees. The second largest asteroid, Pallas, has an inclination of 35 degrees, and the planetoid Betulia's orbit is inclined by 52 degrees. This fact, along with the specific mass distribution of asteroids, suggests both their foreign origin and the impact fragmentation origin of small planets. Naturally, the primary collisions were followed by countless collisions of planetoids with one another. The McGraw-Hill Encyclopedia of Astronomy, 1983, comments on the presence of asteroid holes by stating that the planetoids that previously occupied these gaps were likely destroyed in catastrophic collisions. The Britannica Encyclopedia agrees and adds that the formation of chondrules in chondritic meteorites requires them to be heated to approximately 1,500 degrees Celsius. In light of the proposed hypothesis, it seems quite plausible that the returns of Nibiru and Jupiter's gravity trigger these ejections and sweeping out of asteroids. The mass of the asteroid series is 0.02% that of Earth. Pallas and Vesta have about 3 to 4 times less mass. The 10th largest asteroid is 60 times less massive. A few dozen of the largest asteroids contain about 90% of the total mass of all asteroids. Meanwhile, some estimates suggest that the initial amount of material between Mars and Jupiter may have been 10,000 times greater than today. Meteorite material found in the solar system is sometimes extremely ancient, 4.5 to 5 billion years old, allowing for the hypothesis that material periodically enters the solar system from other stellar planetary systems. Spectrographic analysis of more than 6,000 asteroids has revealed that some of them were heated to such an extent several hundred million years after the formation of the solar system that they melted. The iron seeped into their central parts, forming ironstone cores surrounded by basaltic lavas, as stated about the asteroid Vesta in both the McGraw-Hill Encyclopedia of Astronomy and Britannica. However, a more intriguing conclusion has been drawn regarding so-called differentiated meteorites, which account for up to 10% of asteroid material. It is possible that the asteroids whose fragments appear to be differentiated meteorites are themselves fragments of much larger differentiated planetesimals that originally existed in the region of the inner planets, and which survived in quasi-stationary orbits in the asteroid belt during the early stages of the solar system's formation. Sumerian texts describe Tiamat as a water monster, and Mesopotamian texts tell of Nibiru capturing its waters. He stretched out the heavens like a curtain, set a boundary for his ascent in the middle of the waters. In this context, it would be logical to assume that at least some asteroids contain water. Most planetoid studies have been conducted using spectrophotometry. In total, 15 taxonomical classes of asteroids have been identified. It has been established that about 80% of asteroids belong to 2 classes. About 15% are of type S, with a reddish surface composed of silicates and metallic iron. Approximately 65% of asteroids belong to type C. They contain carbonaceous substances, are black in color, and include water in their composition. Water is not present directly on the surface due to sublimation, but the presence of water molecules on the surface of asteroids indicates that hydrated minerals that make up the asteroid captured water during their formation, and it is part of their composition. This was confirmed in August 1982 when a small asteroid entered Earth's atmosphere. As it disintegrated, a rainbow with a long tail stretching across the sky was observed, indirectly indicating a high water content. Ceres, the largest asteroid in the solar system, belongs to the G class. Water on this planetoid is present in the form of a near-surface layer of permafrost. In November 1977, Charles Cowell from the Hale Observatory on Mount Palomar, California, discovered the aforementioned small planet 2060 Chiron. Initially, the astronomer mistook it for a strange planetoid and temporarily designated it the Cowl object. Chiron's orbit lies between Uranus and Saturn, is highly elongated, and resembles the orbit of a comet. In 1989, specialists at the Kitt Peak National Observatory, Arizona, discovered an extended atmosphere of carbon dioxide and dust around Chiron. Shortly thereafter, Chiron was compared to a very dirty snowball composed of water, dust, and carbon dioxide, with a size ranging from 200 to 370 kilometers. Thus, Chiron belongs to two classes of celestial bodies at once. In 1996, another comet-asteroid hybrid was discovered, measuring between 8 and 16 kilometers. In catalogues, it is designated as 1996 PW. Its orbital period around the Sun is approximately 5,800 years, and at its aphelion, it moves 60 billion kilometers away from our star. The first evidence of water in comets was obtained from the study of comet Kohoutek, 1974. In November 1985, specialists at Kitt Peak Observatory reported that the atmosphere of Halley's comet consists primarily of water vapor. The composition of its loose, icy dust material is 80% water, 13% carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, and about 2% ammonia and methane. The density of the material is only 0.1 to 0.3 grams per cubic centimeter. The size of the dust particles is estimated to be 1 to 10 microns. According to the Giotto spacecraft, dust particles consist of 20 to 30% carbon, which explains their black color. These data were confirmed by infrared studies of the same comet. In January 1986, the Pioneer and Venus spacecraft found that while the comet was between Venus and Mercury, Halley's comet was losing 12 tons of water every second. By March 6, 1986, during its perihelion, water emission had reached 70 tons per second. Finally, in December 1986, as the comet moved away from the Sun, scientists at Johns Hopkins University, studying data from the IUE satellite, detected an explosion in its core, ejecting about 3 million tons of ice into space. At the same time, the comet's total core mass exceeded 100 billion tons. The 1997 Hale-Bopp comet left an indelible impression, being much larger and more productive. With a radius of more than 35 kilometers and a mass of 10 trillion tons, it contained 25 times more water than the Great Lakes of America. Moving along its orbit at 43 kilometers per second, it emitted 100 tons of steam per second during its perihelion. In addition to water, its composition included methanol, formaldehyde, methyl cyanide, carbon compounds, sodium, and other substances. To summarize, the observed parameters and orbital characteristics of comets and asteroids make the hypothesis of their formation through cosmic collisions of celestial bodies quite plausible. The composition of some well-studied cometary nuclei strongly resembles water ice with gases from Earth's primary hydro and atmosphere, Tiamat and its satellites, frozen in it, along with various debris and dust particles. Spatially, asteroids are tied to the location that exactly corresponds to the heavenly battle. Asteroids, incapable of self-heating, sometimes bear traces of complete or partial melting and recrystallization. Therefore, they could have been part of a larger celestial body, shattered into fragments, some of which underwent the mentioned thermal effects. Comet-asteroid hybrids have also been discovered. All of this together supports the argument for the reality of the heavenly battle that took place between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter about 4 billion years ago. The Sumerians were not only aware of the Earth's non-perfect spherical shape, but also of its dimensions. Discovered Chaldean sources dating back 3,000 years state that the radius of the Earth is 6,310 kilometers. Many centuries later, the Greek scientist Eratosthenes, 275 to 195 BC, arrived at a close figure of 6,275 kilometers. According to modern data, the true figure is 6,367 kilometers, about 1% greater than Sumerian estimates. However, existing hypotheses on Earth's expansion allow for an explanation of this slight discrepancy. In the 2nd century BCE, Agatharchides of Cnidus wrote that the length of one side of the Great Pyramid in Giza is exactly equal to 1/8 of a minute of an arc. A simple calculation gives a radius of 6,329 kilometers, which differs from the modern value by only 0.5%. The ancients knew other details and figures, but those will be discussed in subsequent episodes. The Sumerians referred to the Earth with the scientific term KY, Mul-Kai. The corresponding pictogram looked like an oval crossed by vertical lines, resembling a meridian grid. It turns out that Earth's flattening at the poles is now well established. After Ea founded 5 of the 7 settlements of the Anunnaki, he was given the title Enki, Lord Ruler of Earth. However, the term Kai was applied to the planet Earth for a reason. The verb ki means to cut, to break off, to hollow out. Derived words illustrate this concept well. Kila meant excavation, digging, kima, grave, kai indar, crack, split. In Sumerian astronomical texts, the prefix mul, heavenly body, was placed before kai. Thus, by saying mul-ki, the Sumerians implied a heavenly body that was broken, or simply a split planet. During the 2,000-year interval separating Sumerian and Babylonian civilizations, the pronunciation of Kai transformed into Gi or Ji. It was in this form that it was borrowed by the Akkadian language and its branches, Babylonian, Assyrian, and Hebrew, where the word always retained its geographical or topographical meaning of crack, gorge, deep valley. The well-known biblical term Gehenna comes from the Hebrew Gai Hinnom, the name of a narrow ravine near Jerusalem. In school, we were taught that the word geo in earth sciences, geography, geometry, geology, is linked to the Greek Gaia, the name of the goddess of earth. However, what we weren't told is that the Greeks borrowed this word from the Sumerians. Linguists, as we recall, have established that the Greek alphabet evolved from Near Eastern scripts. In the 8th century BC, Hesiod, in Theogony, begins the divine story of events leading to Zeus's supremacy, with lines reminiscent of Enuma, Elish, and the Bible. Truly, chaos was the first to appear, and then came broad-breasted Gaia, she who bore all the immortals, the owners of the snowy peaks of Olympus, the dim Tartarus, who ruled the depths, and Eros, the most beautiful of the immortal gods. From chaos came Erebus, darkness, and black Nyx. From Nyx came Ether and Hemera. In addition to chaos and Gaia, Hesiod mentions 3 more pairs of celestial gods, Tartarus and Eros, Erebus and Nyx, Ether and Hemera. Notably, the creation of heaven in Mesopotamian, biblical, and Hesiod's texts is described only after the creation of the main planets of the solar system. Echoes of interplanetary conflict in Enuma Elish can also be heard in Hesiod's Theogony. And Gaia then bore bright Uranus, equal to herself, to encircle her on all sides and forever hold a place in the abode of the gods. How did the split planet look after the heavenly battle when it found itself on its new orbit? On one side it had solid lands, representing the young but still unformed crust of Tiamat. On the other side there was a depression, a massive scar, where Tiamat's surviving waters likely gathered. Placing the head of Tiamat, Earth, in a new place, he, Marduk, raised mountains on it. He opened channels to drain the waters. From her eyes, he made the Tigris and Euphrates flow. From her breasts, he formed the majestic mountains. In this same period of Earth's creation, Marduk caused the divine moon to appear, assigning it the task of marking the night and determining the days of each month. The name of this new deity, residing within her heavenly pressure, gravitational field, was Sheshki, heavenly deity, protector of Earth. Such a deity was indeed depicted between Marduk and Tiamat. In the Bible's Genesis 1:14-16, this episode is altered. The fragment about the appearance of 2 great lights, intended to give light to the earth and to serve as signs and seasons, is placed not in the early stages of world creation, but after plants already grew abundantly on earth. Hence the widespread belief that in Babylonian and Old Testament accounts, the 4th day of creation is assigned to the creation of the lights in the firmament of heaven, in other words, the stars, sun, moon, and planets. Hesiod writes about Gaia, On one side were vast hills and majestic regions inhabited by the nymph goddess. On the other side was the barren Pontus, a desolate abyss with a terrible wound. A similar description of the split planet is given in the book of Genesis. And God, Elohim, said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And Elohim called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. Genesis 1:9-10. Thus, millennia after the Sumerians and their contemporary cultures, our ancestors, including the authors and compilers of Genesis and later 20th century scientists, adopted Sumerian cosmogony without even knowing it. What further evidence can be brought forward regarding the splitting of Tiamat? The crust of the Moon and Mars comprises about 10% of their masses. For Earth, this figure does not exceed 0.4 to 0.5%. In 1988, a group of geophysicists led by Don Anderson from Caltech reported to the American Geological Society that they had found part of the missing crust. After analyzing the distribution of seismic waves generated by earthquakes, the researchers determined that the Earth's crust had sunk into the mantle to a depth of about 400 kilometers. Yet even with this included, the crust constitutes no more than 4% of the total mass. Scientists believe that the Earth's crust consists of huge plates, some of which in the past were submerged into the Earth. One of the largest plates is the Pacific Plate. But this hypothesis does not answer the question of what force shattered the Earth's crust into these huge plates and caused the lighter material of the crust to sink into the mantle, which is denser than the crust itself. The Earth's crust is heterogeneous and has a very complex structure. In continental regions, its thickness varies from 19 to 72 kilometers, while in oceanic regions, the values range from 5.5 to 8 kilometers. The average elevation of the continents is 700 meters, while the average depth of the oceans exceeds 3,800 meters. The average density of the continental crust is 2.7 to 2.8 grams per cubic centimeter, while the mantle's density is 3.3 grams per cubic centimeter. The density of oceanic crust approaches that of the mantle, fluctuating between 3.0 and 3.1 grams per cubic centimeter. Additionally, the oceanic and continental crusts differ significantly in composition. Thus, there is a fundamental difference between the two types of crust. Among the many petro- and geochemical differences between the oceanic and continental crust and meteoritic material is the scarcity of the light helium isotope. Since the late 1970s, many scientists have estimated the formation of the primary continental relief to be around 2.8 billion years ago. However, geologists have discovered areas on all continents known as Archean granite shields, which likely represent the remnants of the most ancient land masses. It turns out that within these zones, the rocks forming the crust are about 3.8 billion years old. To be more precise, the age values vary slightly but remain close. Africa, Greenland, Karelia, and Ukraine, 3.5 billion years. Siberia, 3.8 to 4.0. Northern Canada, 3.96. Washington State, USA, 4.1. Western Australia, 4.1. Antarctica, Alden, and South Africa, up to 4 billion years. Thus, in general, the continental crust is about 4 billion years old, and this question is no longer debated. During the melting of proto-crust substances, a large amount of andesitic magma formed, which could have become the basis for Earth's primordial crust. Apparently, the rocks of this crust, which arose 4.5 to 4.6 billion years ago, were then completely transformed. However, the oldest rocks of the oceanic crust are no more than 200 million years old. Such a huge age difference cannot be explained by any speculation about the uplifting and subsiding of continents, the formation and disappearance of seas, and so on. The theory that the old continental plates are surrounded by constantly moving, renewing, and growing oceanic plates seems much more convincing. In some points in the Pacific Ocean, the depth reaches 11 kilometers. If we remove the crust that has grown in this area over the last 200 million years, we would get depths of up to 19 kilometers from the water's surface. with a total elevation difference from the continental heights of 32 to 96 kilometers. This would create the enormous depression or scar where water once accumulated. Does planetary science confirm the hypothesis of the heavenly battle? Yes. Japanese planetary scientist Masao Gorai offers the following reasoning. It can be assumed that in Earth's early formation period, there were certain proportions between land and ocean, about 3 to 2. But around 4 billion years ago, a massive depression formed on about 40% of its surface, within which basalt outpourings created oceanic-type crust. Simultaneously, this depression filled with water, resulting in the formation of the primordial ocean. Over the last 200 million years, the area of the Pacific Ocean has been decreasing. Attempts to explain this process and its causes are made through the theory of plate tectonics. This theory rejects the notion of planetary conditions as stable and constant, recognizing the factor of catastrophism, change, and evolution. The founder of the plate tectonics theory is considered to be Alfred Wegener, a German meteorologist who published a book in 1915 in which he laid out the basic ideas of the new theory. Based on the data he had on flora and fauna and several key geological matches between opposite shores of the Atlantic, Wegener proposed the idea of the supercontinent Pangaea, Gondwana, and Laurasia. According to Wegener's view, Pangaea initially covered about half of the Earth's surface and was surrounded by a primordial ocean. Indeed, according to the Encyclopaedia Britannica, the now separated continents fit together perfectly along their contours. The discovery of fossilized plants, freshwater, and land animals, which existed on the territories of present-day Africa, Australia, India, Antarctica, and South America 225 million years ago, as well as identical mountain rocks on the edges of continents, provide strong evidence in favor of this idea. At some point, likely due to internal geodynamic reasons, Pangaea split apart, and its fragments began drifting in different directions. After experiencing a series of cataclysms during the Mesozoic era, the supercontinent eventually split completely, a process that took place over 225 to 65 million years ago. Paleomagnetic research, which began in the 1950s, and the discovery of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge in the 1960s, formed by molten rocks rising and crystallizing in water, also support the existence of Pangaea. The work of geologists A. Cox, H. Hess, and R. Dietz, geophysicists F. Vines, L. Morley, and D. Matthews, and the mathematical foundations provided by J. Morgan and K. Le Pichon played a major role in gathering this evidence. The expansion of the ocean's surface became a key factor in the spreading apart of the Americas and Africa, and the formation of the Atlantic Ocean. It has been established that about 3 square kilometers of new oceanic crust are formed annually. At the same time, the Pacific Ocean is shrinking. Its wound is gradually healing. Likely fundamental cosmic factors also played a role in these processes. These may include processes occurring in the central part of our galaxy, the cyclic orbit of the solar system around the galactic center with a period of 215 to 221 million years, and its passage through so-called galactic jet streams. The existence of such streams of cosmic matter was recently substantiated by physicist A. Barenboim. It appears that many tectonic and climatic changes are chronologically linked to the galactic year. A highly unusual theory about the breakup of Gondwana was developed by Professor P. S. Voronov in his monograph Essays on the Regularities of Earth's Global Relief Morphometry. According to this geologist's calculations, the central part of Gondwana had an oval shape and represented a single giant dome. This dome contained vast deposits of metals. Some theorize that the Pangaean Gondwanan dome was a flattened, large planetoid that collided with Earth, with an estimated radius of around 1,200 kilometers. This approach explains many differences between continental and oceanic crust and several planetary regularities. Another unique variation of the heavenly battle hypothesis can be seen in the theory proposed by geologists L. A. Pukliakov, L. Tomiradiaro, and Sobolev regarding Earth's supposed second satellite, Perun. A collision with Perun, which spread across Earth's surface, led to the formation of Gondwana. Under the force of gravity, the material from this hump gradually spread out and melted until the supercontinent broke apart. Initially much taller, the Peron-Gondwana Dome may have been the center of glaciation. In the early 1970s, another curious hypothesis emerged about the continuous growth of the Earth. Calculations by V.F. Blinov and V.A. Atsukovsky suggest that Earth's radius is increasing at a rate of 0.56 millimeters per year. According to M. Gorai's concept, Earth's original radius was 1,500 kilometers smaller than it is today. If this effect is indeed real, it could significantly influence the development of Earth's crust. Physicist P. Dirac in the 1930s suggested that the gravitational constant, due to the expansion of the universe, decreases. This gradual decrease in Earth's mass caused by this process reduces internal pressure within the planet, causing it to inflate. Geologist S. Carey sought the reason for this phenomenon in the phase transitions of metallic compounds into oxides. M. Gorai, in 1978, saw it as a change in the material composition of molten liquids and the volumetric expansion of mantle rocks. However, such processes cannot, in principle, increase Earth's volume by more than 10%. In the mid-1980s, the phenomenon of subduction, or underthrusting, of the Pacific Plate beneath the American Plate was confirmed. Precise geodetic and cosmogeodetic measurements indicate that the Pacific Plates are moving toward Asia at a speed of 8 to 11 centimeters per year, and that oceanic plates are spreading at a rate of 5 to 15 centimeters per year. America moves away from Europe by 2 to 2.5 centimeters annually, and the Pacific Plate moves at a speed of 4 to 9 centimeters per year. In the area of the Kuril Ridge, subducting plates are visible on seismotomograms at depths of up to 720 kilometers, and in the Mariana Arc region, up to 1,350 kilometers. At a depth of 1,300 to 2,300 kilometers, a ring-shaped Pacific belt has been identified. The density of the mantle in this contracting region is significantly higher than anywhere else. However, it cannot be assumed that the processes of subduction and spreading were original, as Earth's crust would have melted and rejuvenated multiple times over its existence. In 1994, Michael Y. Session from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, used seismic data from 750 earthquakes to scan the Earth's mantle. In the seismically active Indonesian region, he discovered a cold plate 250 kilometers thick at a depth of 2,700 kilometers. According to Y. Session, this plate is a fragment of the Tethys ocean floor. The subduction of a massive block of the primordial lithosphere to such a depth testifies to the colossal catastrophe that occurred during the Heavenly Battle. In 1977, Stephen Morbath reported that geologists believed that greenish-colored sandstone rocks were deposited in a primitive oceanic environment and allow us to outline ancient oceans, and that granite gneiss areas may well be remnants of those ancient oceans themselves. One indicator of geological youth, activity, and an unhealed wound in the Pacific region is the abundance of active volcanoes. In fact, the Pacific is bordered by the so-called Ring of Fire of active volcanoes. Most of the world's active volcanoes, about 77%, approximately 550 in total, are concentrated in the Pacific, 360, and Kuril-Kamchatka regions. In these same edge areas of the Pacific Plate lie subduction zones. Geologists have repeatedly tried to determine the age of continental drift. Stephen Morbath suggests that this process began around 600 million years ago. Other scientists, using computer modeling, converge on a close figure, 550 million years. However, the tectonic cause of this drift is most likely rooted in events and processes from about 4 billion years ago. Thus, it is evident that modern scientific data aligns with the ideas expressed in ancient Sumerian texts. The Old Testament also repeatedly refers to the foundation of the earth and provides some information about the earth's surface structure. The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. Psalm 24, 1-2. Additionally, the Hebrew word eretz simultaneously means both planet Earth and land soil. The term Yabashah used in Genesis literally means dry, arid land. Notably, the appearance of Yabashah is preceded by the gathering together in one place of water. In the Old Testament, the term Tebel is often used to describe habitable and humanly interesting land, including that containing ores. This word is typically translated as either earth or world, and is most applicable to dry land as a conceptual antonym of seas and oceans. This is best expressed in the Song of David, Psalm 18:14-16, and in 2 Samuel 22:14-16. The Lord thundered from heaven, the voice of the Most High resounded, hailstones and fiery coals. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy, with great bolts of lightning he routed them. The valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of Tebel were laid bare at your rebuke, Lord, at the blast of breath from your nostrils. Psalm 18:14-16. The Lord thundered from heaven, the voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy, with great bolts of lightning he routed them. The valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of Tebel were laid bare at the rebuke of the Lord. 2 Samuel 22:14-16. Once again, let us recall that the Bible says that the waters were gathered to one side of the earth, while the other side was dry land. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. Genesis 1:9. Thus, there must have been a depression where the waters could collect, and that depression likely not only existed, but still exists today, known as the Pacific Ocean. Interesting data about the Pacific Ocean has already been provided. Its extreme depths, its rim of active volcanoes, the reduction in its overall surface area, and so on. The Pacific Ocean occupies exactly half of the area of the world's oceans, 180 million square kilometers, and contains 53% of all water, 724 million cubic kilometers, more than all the other oceans and inland seas combined. Let us consider another interesting geological feature. As already mentioned, Earth's crust is no more than 4 billion years old, which is far younger than the 4.6 to 5.0 billion years suggested for the planets of the solar system as a whole. Interestingly, at a 1967 conference on the origin of life in Princeton, all participants agreed that about 4 billion years ago, Earth experienced a cataclysm. The primordial Earth's crust partially melted and fractured into several blocks, which then began to recrystallize, thus starting a new clock. Planetologists consider Earth to be a unique object in the solar system. The Earth's crust represents the highest stage of planetary crust evolution, characteristic only of Earth. This likely could have been the actual process of Earth's crust rupture, which led to plate tectonics, the formation of the primordial ocean, and the emergence of Pangaea 4 billion years ago. And the name of this cataclysm was given in the Sumerian texts, the Heavenly Battle. What else happened to Earth 4 billion years ago? Imagine, it lost its atmosphere. It is known to geologists that ancient Earth's basalts were subjected to remelting, but the cause of the extraordinarily strong metamorphism of the basaltic crust remains a mystery that has baffled several generations of geologists. It has been experimentally established that such metamorphism occurs at pressures of about 10,000 atmospheres and temperatures of at least 1,000 degrees Celsius. It is also established that Earth's primordial atmosphere consisted primarily of hydrogen, inert gases, and mantle gases, H2, CO2, CO, NH3, CH4, H2O, etc. And for the first few hundred million years after its formation, it had a temperature close to 600 degrees Celsius. Around 4.0 to 3.9 billion years ago, the atmosphere heated up so much that it left the planet. Planetologists believe two factors contributed to this: the sun's energy and the energy from large celestial bodies colliding with ancient Earth. Rocks that are 3.8 billion years old show no signs of metamorphism. On the other hand, the presence of blue-green algae in deposits of that age clearly indicates that the ocean's temperature had dropped to values below 100 degrees Celsius. This is the official view of geologists, so everything falls into place, and independent modeling by planetologists of the Sumerian scenario provides the following picture. Massive Tiamat had a dense and rather hot atmosphere, but it remained a highly water-rich planet. One model presents the composition of the primordial atmosphere as follows: water vapor, carbon dioxide, and hydrochloric acid in a ratio of 20 to 3 to 1, respectively. This chemically aggressive mixture reacted vigorously with volcanic rocks, resulting in the formation of sedimentary rocks and various salts. Subsequently, the vapor must have condensed into a hot, salty ocean. Due to active volcanism, metamorphic processes and the formation of granites occurred on the surface of Tiamat for about 500 to 600 million years. Approximately 4 billion years ago, a collision with some celestial body, or bodies, heated the surface of the planet so much that the speed of gas molecules, which composed the primary atmosphere, increased sharply, and this atmosphere escaped into space. There is no doubt that such collisions took place. Recently, a group of American scientists, led by K. Schultz, discovered colossal impact craters in North America, 1,000 kilometers and 2,800 kilometers in diameter. The Encyclopedia Britannica also reports on this. The primary accretion of Earth occurred about 4.6 billion years ago. The formation of Earth's crust took about 500 million years. Apparently, the formation of Earth's core led to the expulsion into space of the primary primitive atmosphere, which was replaced by an atmosphere formed from the release of volatile substances from Earth's internal layers. The almost instantaneous drop in atmospheric pressure, on the one hand, sharply reduced the atmosphere's temperature and, on the other hand, stimulated the release of gases from the partially remelted crust. Thus, the background for the completion of the metamorphism of rocks was the rapid formation of a new atmosphere and the envelopment of the reborn Earth in a shell of steam and volcanic gases. As the atmosphere cooled, torrential rains began, activating the oxidation of rocks and leading to the first portions of oxygen entering the surrounding environment. Indeed, it has been established that as early as 3.8 billion years ago, there was oxygen in Earth's atmosphere, and life existed in the oceans. The final formation of the air's composition, stabilization of oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, occurred after the appearance of plants and bacteria, which activated the nitrogen cycle. The fifth tablet of the Enuma Elish describes lava flows as the spittle and saliva of Tiamat and volcanic activity before the formation of the atmosphere, oceans, and continents. According to the text, spittle, moving forward, layered one layer upon another. It then describes the coming of cold and the gathering of rain clouds. Following this, there is mention of the rising of the land and the gathering of waters into the ocean. Only after this, as also described in the book of Genesis, does the period of the emergence of life begin. The conclusion is clear. The latest geophysical data and hypotheses directly or indirectly confirm the reality of the heavenly battle, and that, prior to this event, Earth was quite different from what it is now. In connection with the previously discussed idea of linking the flood to climate changes on Earth, it would be appropriate here to consider possible planetary and cosmic causes of this phenomenon. In the late 1950s, the idea was put forward that an increase in the sun's luminosity was one of the factors influencing the Pleistocene climate. Subsequently, the problem of climate factors was addressed by considering fluctuations in Earth's atmospheric greenhouse gases, ammonia, and carbon dioxide. The latter hypothesis eventually gained the most popularity. The fact is that a fourfold increase in CO2 content leads to an increase in the average annual air temperature by 5 degrees Celsius. This idea was first proposed by S. Arrhenius, 1899. The rise in temperature leads to glacier melting, and at the same time, an increase in the area of the oceans, and a decrease in the temperature of both water and air. This, in turn, causes a significant portion of atmospheric CO2 to dissolve in water, reducing the greenhouse effect. Thus, the ocean, as the main reservoir of water and carbon dioxide, along with orbital astronomical factors, is responsible for the ice ages on our planet. During each glacial period, water forms massive ice deposits, releasing carbon dioxide, and the process begins anew. This phenomenon is auto-oscillatory, convincingly demonstrated in the works of V. Zubikov. In 1976, a paper by J. Hayes, J. Imbrie, and N. Shackleton caused a great stir among climatologists. The authors, based on a detailed statistical analysis of temperature fluctuations over the last 450,000 years from data on the composition of organic sediments in the southern hemisphere's oceans, identified well-defined periodic climate changes with intervals of approximately 100,000, 42,000, and 23,000 years. The first interval corresponds to the period of precessional changes of the equinoxes. The second is associated with changes in Earth's axial tilt, and the third almost coincides with the period of changes in Earth's orbital eccentricity. Thus, in one way or another, the climate turned out to be related to variations in Earth's orbital parameters. Undoubtedly, changes in Earth's axial orientation in space affect the state of the lithosphere and lead to the activation of volcanism. However, increased volcanic activity alone can cause short-term climate changes, lasting tens or hundreds of years. Nevertheless, for living organisms, even such periods can have the most tragic consequences. It became apparent only in the 20th century that Earth's magnetic field was quite different in the geological past. Paleomagnetic studies have conclusively shown that over the last 1.2 million years, at least 10 complex geomagnetic events and up to 18 simpler ones have occurred. One such event, La Champ, dates back 42,000 to 44,000 years. The Mono Lake event took place from 23,500 to 29,500 years ago. Among the most recent Holocene pole shifts are the Etruscan shift, 5,700 years ago, and the Gothenburg shift, 12,300 to 13,000 years ago. The latter date may hold special significance. In addition to the slow wandering of magnetic poles, which is explained by the movement of continents relative to each other, faster and shorter-term changes are also known. These periods of Earth's magnetic field fluctuations also follow a certain periodicity. According to G. Petrova, they occur at intervals close to 100,000, 36,000, 23,000, and 12,000 to 15,000 years, which generally correlates with the periodicity of ice ages. According to V. S. Wechsler, 1928, about 13,000 years ago, Earth's magnetic moment was at its lowest in the past 25,000 years. Comparable minima were observed around 29,000, 62,000, 117,000, and 145,000 years ago. Earth's magnetic field not only fluctuates in intensity, but periodic pole reversals, magnetic pole shifts, also occur. Reversed magnetization of rocks was first discovered in 1906 in France. The general pattern of this phenomenon is as follows. When the magnetic field strength decreases by approximately 3.5 times, fluctuations, large amplitude changes in the geomagnetic field, begin. When the strength decreases sevenfold, the magnetic poles move to lower latitudes. Then the polarity changes and the field gradually recovers, though more slowly than it decayed. Currently, the dipole component of Earth's magnetic field is decreasing at such a rate that in 2,000 years, this magnetic field could simply disappear. The question of the origin of planetary magnetic fields is not fully understood. In general terms, it was first addressed by Larmor, 1919, through the idea of a self-exciting dynamo, later developed by E. Bullard in the late 1940s. S. Braginski suggested three sources of energy for the geodynamo: the cumulative precession of Earth's axis, causing inertial forces, and the flow of melts, external; thermal convection in Earth's liquid body, internal; and compositional convection, internal. Undoubtedly, for the creation of a magnetic field, the presence of ferromagnetics in the outer core, the orientation of atomic spins, and vortex, magnetodynamic, and possibly aerodynamic effects play a significant role. In principle, Earth's magnetic field could be represented as a symmetrical spherical dipole field. However, there are four major anomalies on its surface, in Siberia, North America, Antarctica, and South America. The centers of these anomalies are located at the intersections of 60 degrees north and 60 degrees south parallels and 120 degrees east and 120 degrees west meridians. This field structure led J. Bloxham and D. Gubbins in 1990 to propose a model of Earth's magnetic field and the flow of liquid matter inside Earth from the outer to the inner core. To activate the geodynamo (MHD) generator, circulation of electrically conductive molten material is required in the outer shell, generating an electric current that produces the magnetic field. Coriolis and Archimedean forces, along with parameters like viscosity and hydrostatic pressure, act as regulators of the molten flow. Recently, the journal Science published a hypothesis by American geophysicists Ronald Cohen and Lars Stixrud. According to their data, Earth's core, with a temperature of around 4,000 degrees Celsius and a diameter of 2,500 kilometers, is a solid iron-iron nickel crystal with a hexagonal structure. This hypothesis is based on the observed but poorly understood phenomenon of seismic wave velocity anisotropy within Earth. This, by the way, gives grounds to believe that the primary role in generating the magnetic field is played not by the ferromagnetics themselves, but by the circulation of electrically conductive masses. A combination of factors, such as disruptions in convection of molten material within Earth, disturbances in the functioning of Earth's dynamo, changes in the planet's axial tilt, and periodic greenhouse effects, can lead to large-scale and dramatic natural phenomena. We can conclude that Earth's climate and magnetic field fluctuations are interconnected to some extent, occur with a certain periodicity, and could well have been recorded in the memory of our ancestors and passed down to us in the form of legends about terrifying catastrophes and disasters. The origin of the Moon. The dating of lunar rocks, studied by Russian and American scientists, ranges between 3.2 to 4.6 billion years. This implies that the Moon is older than Earth. This raises many other questions. First of all, how did it form? Based on the idea of the protoplanetary cloud that surrounded the Sun, it is generally believed that any planet forms its satellites from its own material, following the residual principle. However, when comparing the relative sizes of Earth and the Moon, as well as Pluto and Charon, with other satellite systems, there is a notable discrepancy by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. Thus, according to many scientists, it would be more accurate to call the Earth-Moon system a double planet. But are these planets related? One of the earliest hypotheses about the Moon's origin was proposed in 1879 by the English astronomer George Darwin, the second son of Charles Darwin, who used mathematical calculations and geophysical theory. Darwin specialized in the study of tides, so the formation of the Moon, in his understanding, followed the mechanism of a drop separating from the primordial Earth-Moon body, which cooled and became the Moon. This theory, in various forms, was revived 3 times in the 20th century. In their research, scientists tried to identify and explain the reason for the separation of the original, larger protoplanetary object. One hypothesis attributed this to an excessively high angular momentum of rotation, and it became known as the fission and coagulation hypothesis. However, all these hypotheses and theories failed to explain the current distance of the Earth-Moon system and the limits set by the Roche limit, as well as the unusually large angular momentum of this system. According to calculations, the proto-Earth would have had to possess 4 times the angular momentum that the Earth-Moon system currently has. The period of such a system's rotation would have been only 4 hours. In 1930, H. Jeffreys presented strong physical arguments against this model, rendering it highly unlikely. The Apollo and Lunokhod programs also worked against the fission and coagulation hypothesis. The average density of the Moon, 3.34 grams per cubic centimeter, is close to the density of Earth's mantle, which is 3.0 to 3.3 grams per cubic centimeter. However, despite the apparent similarities between Earth and the Moon, they cannot be called twins. If the Moon had formed from the mantle and crust of proto-Earth, the elemental composition of both planets would be nearly identical. However, the lunar crust, composed mainly of anorthosite, is unusually poor in siderophile elements: phosphorus, cobalt, molybdenum, nickel, and tungsten. Conversely, it is very rich in so-called refractories, high-melting elements and compounds such as aluminum oxide, calcium, magnesium, titanium, etc. In the September-October 1975 issue of American Scientist, Stuart Taylor concluded, considering all these factors, identifying the composition of the Moon with the composition of Earth's outer layers turns out to be a complex matter. Planetologist A. Ringwood, in his detailed work, The Origin of the Earth and Moon, made a similarly serious statement. The Moon is not a true planet of the terrestrial group. A conference dedicated to the origin of the Moon, held in October 1984 in Hawaii, with the participation of many scientists and specialists, ultimately dismissed this theory after analyzing the available data. Testing the hypothesis of the Moon's capture by Earth's gravity, proposed by H. Gerstenkorn in 1955, gradually led to the conclusion that if the Moon was indeed captured, it was always located near Earth. The event, which Gerstenkorn dated back 2 billion years, seems extremely unlikely. The third model was the binary hypothesis, or double planet hypothesis, proposed by G. Kuiper, 1952, and E. Ruskol, 1960. It was based on the ideas of Immanuel Kant and Pierre-Simon Laplace from the late 18th and early 19th centuries. This hypothesis suggested that the Earth formed first from a protoplanetary cloud, and the Moon later formed from leftover material. This hypothesis, while initially attractive, is unable to explain the excessively large angular momentum of the Earth-Moon system. Additionally, the surface and composition of the outer layers of the Moon suggest that its magma ocean formed due to the partial melting of significant volumes of the Moon's outer and inner parts. However, the binary hypothesis cannot explain the release of such a large amount of heat. Such an event could only have occurred due to some catastrophic event. This hypothesis also struggles to explain why the Moon is tidally locked, always facing Earth with the same side, and why its composition is depleted in iron. The efficiency of capturing planetesimals is also questionable. In the context of analyzing data obtained through direct exploration of the Moon, the giant impact hypothesis emerged. In 1975, geochemists William Hartmann and Donald Davis from the Planetary Science Institute in Tucson calculated the intensity of bombardment on planets by small and large asteroids. Their conclusion was that this occurred very frequently in the past. They suggested that the Moon was splashed out from Earth during one such colossal collision. In 1976, Alistair Cameron from Harvard and William Ward from Caltech, in their work, The Origin of the Moon, described a similar model of a collision between Earth and a planet wandering through the solar system. They believed this planet was about 3 times the size of Mars, moving at a speed of about 11 kilometers per second. According to their calculations, the collision, which lasted about 18 minutes, shifted Earth's axis and gave its orbit a slight eccentricity. The kinetic energy released during the collision heated both bodies to 6,000 degrees Celsius, the temperature of the Sun's photosphere. Some of the splashed debris fell back, while the rest formed the Moon. However, evidence of Earth's complete melting could not be found. Specifically, the crystallization of rocks after such an event would occur differently, and certain deformations would inevitably appear in chondrites, the oldest material on Earth, but this has not been observed. Finally, the Moon's age would not exceed that of Earth. Thus, there is no unified theory about the origin of the Moon. The most popular hypotheses currently are the double planet and coagulation hypotheses. At the 1984 Conference on the Moon's Origin, reports presented on stress in the lunar crust by Sean Solomon from MIT and isotope ratios indicated a relatively cold origin for our satellite. Lunar rocks are covered with a layer of regolith, a glassy substance formed by high-velocity impacts of meteorites. Its age is about 3.9 billion years. It is believed that when a meteoroid hits the Moon's surface at speeds of 20 kilometers per second or more, its material vaporizes due to the release of kinetic energy and then settles on the Moon in the form of grains about 0.1 millimeters in size. At a NASA press conference in 1972, it was announced that the Moon had experienced a period of intense activity in the past. The most significant cataclysms occurred around 4 billion years ago, when it was bombarded by celestial bodies, ranging in size from large cities to small countries. After recent studies by the lunar orbiter Clementine, more than 40 impact ring structures and basins were identified. Curious conclusions were drawn from the study of two of the largest formations on the Moon. The first is the very ancient Mare Orientale, located mostly on the far side of the Moon. The diameter of its outer rim is about 1,000 kilometers, and its inner rim is 600 kilometers. The sea is surrounded by powerful mountain ranges up to 6 kilometers high. The substance from the impact or other process that formed this sea was scattered up to 1,000 kilometers beyond the ring structure. All previous surface features were completely destroyed. Another significant structure on the Moon is the South Pole Aitken Basin. This is one of the largest impact formations known in the solar system, measuring 2,500 kilometers in diameter, 2/3 of the Moon's disk. The collision with an unknown planetoid occurred about 4 billion years ago. The lunar crust was pierced to a depth of at least 120 kilometers, and the resulting basin is about 12 kilometers deep. The existence of such a formation fits well into the model of the heavenly battle, both in scale and in the timing of the event. Two other large formations, clearly visible even with binoculars, are the Mare Imbrium and the Mare Serenitatis. Astronomers believe that around 4 billion years ago, the impact of a large planetoid formed the Mare Serenitatis, with a diameter of 740 kilometers, and shortly afterward, a larger body created the Mare Imbrium. The debris from the Mare Imbrium impact can be seen on at least half of the visible lunar surface. Some data suggest that in the past, the Moon may have had a fairly dense atmosphere composed of hydrogen, helium, argon, sulfur, carbon compounds, and water vapor. As previously mentioned, radar research using the American military spacecraft Clementine found evidence of subsurface ice in the lunar polar regions. Between the South Pole and the Amundsen crater, an area resembling the Greenland ice sheet was discovered. For Kingu, the spouse and main satellite of the water monster Tiamat, polar ice caps and the presence of water seem quite plausible and even natural. In Enuma Elish, the drama of Kingu, the Moon is described as follows. And Kingu, who was the leader among them, he, Marduk, Nibiru, forced to contract and made him the god Dug-Ga-E. He took away from him the tablet of destiny, which was not his by right, placed his own seal upon it, and attached it to his chest. Deprived of its former orbital momentum, Kingu was demoted to an ordinary satellite, our Moon. Studying the decrease in the Moon's density due to the reduction in the amount of iron it once contained, Alistair Cameron wrote, "In the solar system, there are two planetary objects whose unusual average densities point to their uniqueness and suggest they underwent incredible events. These are the Moon and Mercury. The first has a very low average density and is almost completely devoid of iron." In other words, Kingu was indeed compressed. Explaining the complex set of unusual properties of the Moon solely by the influence of the nearby Earth leads to insurmountable contradictions. Analyzing the known data, Russian scientists O.G. Sorokin, Institute of Oceanology, and S.A. Ushakov, Moscow State University, concluded that the Moon is a remnant of a larger planet, Proto-Moon. However, due to the lack of another hypothesis, they believe that Proto-Moon poured its iron-nickel core onto Earth in the early stages of its formation. The Moon's density is extremely low due to an abnormally low iron content, which suggests that the Moon experienced some incredible events. Something seems to have ripped out most of its iron core. The core, by the way, has an irregular pear shape, estimated to be 200 to 600 kilometers in size, and is displaced toward Earth, precisely on the side where the lunar seas and oceans are located. The mass of the hypothetical metallic core does not exceed 2% of the Moon's mass. The near and far sides of the Moon differ strikingly. On the far side, there are no seas or oceans, but there are extensive mountain ranges and an incredible number of craters, including some truly massive ones. The crust there is twice as thick, 130 kilometers, as on the side facing Earth, 65 kilometers. On the near side, vast plains and depressions dominate, under which mass concentrations, mascons, are located, unexplained density anomalies causing regional gravitational field anomalies. The thickness of the crust above them is very small, 30 to 35 kilometers, 3 times less than on the far side. No one denies the possibility that these are asteroids stuck within the Moon. Another theory suggests that at the moment of impact, planetoids exploded and denser mantle material flowed into the gaps they created. In either case, the formation of mascons is linked to the creation of large impact ring basins, which also formed 4 billion years ago. This fits well with the narrative of previous episodes. A qualitative comparison of the near and far sides of the Moon leads to some additional thoughts. It is clear that the spotted side visible from Earth is much younger. Could this be the seal of Nibiru? The density and size of craters on the far side of the Moon exceed those on the side facing Earth many times over. The near-total absence of seas and the presence of enormous craters several hundred to 1,000 kilometers in diameter make it reasonable to assume that in the distant past the side we see was almost simultaneously peppered with large asteroids. The magma that erupted formed the young surface. Some of Nibiru's asteroids or satellites could have struck it deeply enough to knock out its iron core, causing deformation and displacement from the center. The small satellites or asteroids stuck inside created the observed density anomalies, the mascons. In addition, these collisions, along with Earth's influence on the Moon's displaced core, may have drastically reduced its rotational momentum. As a result, the convection of conductive material in its central part was disrupted, leading to the decay of the magnetic field. The composition of lunar basalts closely resembles that of mid-ocean ridge basalts on Earth. Therefore, it is logical to assume that they erupted from the Moon's interior. It has been established that the period of active volcanism and lunar basalt eruptions lasted from about 3.8 to 3.2 billion years ago. Around 3 billion years ago, lunar volcanism sharply declined. It turns out that about 4 billion years ago, some cataclysm stirred up the Moon's interior, triggering its tectonic and magmatic activity for an extended period. Interesting details also arise when considering the etymology of the Sumerian term dugge-e. Literally, it means lead pot. Strangely enough, one of the mysteries from the Apollo program was the discovery of non-native lead on the Moon. The first few kilometers of the lunar crust were, and still are, unusually rich in uranium. It is well known that during radioactive decay, uranium turns into radiogenic lead. There is virtually no primary, non-radiogenic lead in the surface layer. The source and cause of this enrichment of the Moon's upper layers are unknown to classical science. However, this is entirely consistent with the possible ejection of radioactive materials during the destruction of the Moon's core and the satellites of Nibiru. To summarize, like Proto-Earth, Tiamat, Proto-Moon, King underwent massive cataclysms approximately 4 billion years ago and was a direct participant and witness of the heavenly battle. Under the influence of impacts from large celestial bodies, it lost its primary atmosphere and magnetic field, was stripped of most of its iron core, and entered an 800 million year phase of active magmatism. According to modern estimates, the biosphere includes anywhere between 3 and 30 million species of animals, plants, mosses, and so-called prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Only 1.4 million species have been named. The interactions and roles of the others are barely understood at this time. Still, such an extraordinary richness of life forms has constantly confronted humans with the question of life's origin. The paramount importance of understanding the mystery of life's emergence in the cosmos and on Earth is self-evident. As the great thinker and encyclopedic scientist V.I. Vernadsky wrote, "No question is more important to us than the mystery of life, the eternal mystery that has stood before humanity for millennia, and one it strives to solve with all facets of its personal and collective creativity." The theory of evolution does not explain how life began on Earth. Instead, it documents the complexity and number of forms of living organisms that have inhabited our planet over time, reducing the process of the emergence of the first living beings to unique coincidences and conditions of a probabilistic and statistical nature. The pessimistic conclusion about the uniqueness of life in the universe is allegedly confirmed by the silence of the cosmos at radio frequencies. This same thesis leads to the denial of the planetary cosmic phenomenon of unidentified flying objects. In this sense, orthodox evolutionism has cornered itself by denying an objectively existing reality and has become a scientific anachronism. The probabilistic method of random combinations of chemical compounds and environmental conditions makes the theoretical emergence of protein-based life impossible, even in the simplest forms. In the recently published book, The Biological Universe, Stephen Dick asked scientists to analyze the probability of a simple living organism appearing through chaotic molecular collisions. Physicist Harold Morowitz, through rigorous calculations, arrived at the staggering value of 10 to the power of -1 billion. The calculations of the world-renowned astrophysicist Fred Hoyle are slightly more optimistic, 10 to the -40,000. Biochemist Robert Shapiro estimates the probability of the spontaneous formation of an RNA molecule to be 10 to the -100,000. Attempts to create life on a carbon basis through a directed, deliberate process, as in modern biochemical laboratories, or due to some universal factor, were also pursued for a considerable time. However, not a single living organism has yet been created in any laboratory. In fact, as the knowledge of the structure and functioning of the simplest living organisms deepened, the impossibility of random assembly of fat, protein, water, and nucleotide molecules into proto-organisms became more apparent. Thus, from a statistical perspective, life is an absolutely impossible phenomenon. In a fundamental work describing the contemporary physical view of the world, Paul Davies notes, "The laws that allowed for the spontaneous emergence of the universe were likely themselves born of an ingenious plan. The universe must have a purpose, and the collective data of modern physics rather convincingly suggest that this purpose includes our existence." The idea of life as a cosmic phenomenon was expressed in the late 17th century by Christian Huygens, 1629 to 1695. Life, wrote Huygens, is a cosmic phenomenon, sharply distinct from inert matter. Immanuel Kant in 1755 asserted, "Undoubtedly most planets are inhabited and by highly advanced beings." The astronomer Camille Flammarion, in his The Plurality of Inhabited Worlds, 1908, was equally categorical. The habitability of planets is the sole explanation of their existence, and neither the structure of planets nor any other conditions can prevent the development of life there. At the same time, for many years, there was a prevailing notion among scientists that the cosmos, which generates life, is itself alive. This thesis was succinctly formulated by natural philosopher Lorenz Oken. Omne vivo ex vivo, all living things arise from living things. In a similar vein, V.I. Vernadsky wrote, "After 3 centuries of geological history, we can assert that nowhere on our planet have we found deposits devoid of life." He also stated, "Facts give us no indication of the formation of any organism from non-living matter. All experiments attempting to synthesize life have consistently yielded negative results. At present, no species of animal or plant exists for which the hypothesis of archaeogenesis can be entertained." Many spiritual teachers and gurus hold similar opinions. The arguments they present are often as convincing as they are clever. Today, there are 2 primary theories about the origin of life on Earth: the evolutionary theory, Charles Darwin and A.I. Oparin, and the creationist theory, an act of divine creation. For many years, these 2 views were locked in irreconcilable conflict, a struggle that began to ease only relatively recently. In 1950, Pope Pius XII acknowledged in his encyclical Humani Generis, on the human race, that evolutionism, despite everything, is compatible with Christian doctrine. In 1968, the U.S. Supreme Court declared that any restrictions on teaching the theory of evolution in schools were unconstitutional. And in 1981, Pope John Paul II prudently separated the Holy Scriptures and evolution as entirely different subjects, and thus inherently non-contradictory. On December 11, 1996, at a meeting of leading representatives of the Church and science, attended by U.S. Vice President Al Gore, a 5-year program for the search for extraterrestrial life was discussed, with a budget of $1 billion. More recently, in late 1997, it was reported that the Pope had urged a group of astronomers to try to find the fingerprints of God. traces of extraterrestrial life. Recent years have also seen the rise of the unified holographic information theory of the universe, developed by Russian academician G.B. Dvorin. The author managed to link the discovery of the holographic nature of living vision with the energy field and informational holographic essence of the world and its development principles, addressing questions of the origin of life, information preservation and transmission, and many other fundamental scientific and philosophical aspects, including ufological ones. G.B. Dvorin discovered and experimentally substantiated the existence of the phenomenon of self-coding information necessary for the self-organization processes observed in nature across all structural and biological levels of matter. Notably, he gave his work the subtitle, God, Soul, and the Universal Code are Material and Real. The regularities of structuring the physical vacuum, formerly widely known as ether, were explored in the fundamental and multifaceted works of Doctor of Technical Sciences A. Atsukovsky. The historical, theoretical, and practical aspects and calculations presented in this monograph deserve the utmost attention. The synthesis of heterodynamics and holographic theory appears particularly promising. Finally, these two directions align seamlessly with studies conducted within the framework of discovering torsion interactions in nature. Academician Khaznachev believes that, on the surface of the Earth during its formation, simultaneously with the material substrate of accretion, there were field forms of living matter, as the cosmos itself is living matter. These studies, in some respects, continue to develop ideas previously expressed in the first half of the 20th century by V. Vernadsky. According to G. I. Shilov and A. E. Akimov, primary torsion fields and absolute nothingness constitute the supreme intelligence, the ultimate informational constant. In some theories about the origin of life, there are no strict requirements for environmental parameters or elemental or chemical composition. Indeed, protein-based carbon life does not necessarily have to be the only possible form of this phenomenon. At different stages in the history of the metagalaxy, various media might have served as life carriers: interstellar space, radio bees, stellar plasma, plasmoids, molten mantle matter of silicate and metal-based planets, crees or lavobes, methane-hydrogen oceans of gas giants, hydrobes, and so on. Incidentally, in 1998, signs of silicon-based life were discovered in Russia. At least many typical biological features have been identified in some popular minerals, e.g. agates. As for cold, near-Earth plasmoids, they are widely observed and recorded on a large scale, e.g. long-term scientific studies by Italian researcher L. Bocconi. In this regard, it is worth recalling the mysterious phenomenon of self-moving stones and boulders weighing up to 500 kilograms in Death Valley, California, USA. Traditional explanations, rain, wind, sliding due to low friction, tectonic effects, etc., proved untenable. Perhaps the answer is simpler. These stones are living organisms. The data cited emphasize that in recent decades, the foundations of most natural sciences are continuously updated and sometimes radically revised. The universe is no longer seen as a random system with a set of interaction types, but rather, if you will, as a single self-organizing living and intelligent entity operating at countless levels, where life and intelligence are permanent cosmic factors. The first experimental and theoretical data shedding new light on the mystery of life were obtained in the 1920s to 1930s. During this period, A. L. Chizhevsky comprehensively studied various solar-terrestrial connections. In the 1930s, he also conducted the first studies in special devices with significantly reduced magnetic field intensity, hypomagnetic chambers. In 1965, V. P. Khaznachev, continuing this work, proposed the idea of a biosystem as a non-equilibrium photon ensemble existing due to the influx and transformation of incoming energy and information. The carrier of information in organizing, regulating, and activating subtle systems is the electromagnetic field, including its visible component, light. Dr. Jiang Kancheng arrived at similar ideas. His experiments demonstrated that genetic material exists in two forms: electromagnetic active and DNA passive. Using biomagnetic microwave signals, he created hybrids of plants and even some animals in his setup. He has also patented and registered a method of microwave therapy. In 1997, summarizing years of biophysical and other research, VP Kazanachev hypothesized that protein nucleic forms integrate field forms of living matter. The field forms of billions of cells, in the form of soliton holographic torsion fields, can unite into a single giant soliton, forming the basis of cellular civilizations in multicellular organisms, including structures responsible for human intelligence. The number of cells in the life cycle of one human being is estimated at 10 to the 23rd power, vastly surpassing the total number of humans who have ever lived on Earth. This thesis opens a fundamentally new approach to biological sciences. Indeed, it turns out that every living being is a microcosm. The presence of field forms of life in the cosmos leads to the construction and materialization of complex asymmetric chemical compounds. As evidenced by synergetics experiments, the emergence of protein life alters matter and its energetics, changing the properties of space and time. For survival and development, cells control the state of matter, space, and energy around them. The universe emerged and exists as a unified whole, combining living, spirit, and non-living matter forms. These forms are unified on a subtle level, while at the physical and informational level, they possess holographic properties. The universal spirit creates matter, whose structuring and properties are adequately described by the etherodynamic model. As one of the researchers of subtle cause and effect karmic relationships, S.N. Lazarev noted that in the process of creating new matter, an increasing number of informational connections are established within it. That is, in a sense, as it accumulates information, matter continuously becomes more complex and smarter. The interaction of material protein nucleic bodies with living field matter and their informational self-development is believed to periodically lead to sharp qualitative jumps, which are revolutionary in nature and retrospectively perceived by us as evolutionary progress. This process, both in quality and scale, is unlimited and can continue indefinitely. VP Kazanachev clarifies, any protein nucleic form, at the moment of its birth, must be fertilized by a field form. This kind of approach inevitably leads to a rethinking of the very nature of human intelligence and its interaction with the surrounding cosmos, including cause and effect, the so-called karma, and synergetic, including parapsychological aspects. A clear distinction between the characteristics of living and non-living matter also appears highly significant. In this classification, human linguistic civilization is only one of the many adaptive variants of cosmic living matter adapting to combinations of field and protein nucleic forms. This approach signifies a rejection of geocentrism, anthropocentrism, and protein nucleic centrism, while leading to the understanding of human consciousness as part of the informational field flows permeating the living cosmic space. Planet Earth has remarkable features in the spatial organization of its solid shell. Plato once stated, "Earth, seen from above, resembles a ball stitched from 12 pieces of leather," a view shared by all Pythagoreans. Indeed, modern views hold that the planet's relief structures follow three fourth-order symmetry axes. The forms of relief and internal organization of the spheroid sectors are arranged according to the laws of periodicity and similarity, with a 30-degree increment, confirming ancient ideas. Curious patterns of this kind are also known under the names of geographic and geological homologies and have been researched by scientists like Charles Lyell, Alexander Humboldt, Edward Suess, and Alexander P. Karpinski. The hexagonal network, grid, holds particular importance for the globe, expressed on Earth's surface as a network of faults. According to A.E. Fedorov, large cells measure 400 to 500 kilometers and are further divided into 6 almost equilateral triangles of 220 to 250 kilometers each, so that the angles of all figures are close to 60 degrees or 120 degrees. Arc, circular, oval, and vortex, spiral structures also play significant roles, appearing in a variety of formations and phenomena of the Earth's crust, including batholithic and porphyritic arcs, fold arcs, volcanic arcs, circular geological structures, granite gneiss domes, and vortex structures in the Alaskan and Caribbean regions. Over the past 4.2 billion years, geologists have identified 8 spirals in the northern hemisphere, with durations ranging from 816 to 160 million years. Astonishingly, all centers of crop plant distribution, first identified by N.I. Vavilov, and ancient civilization sites also align with zones of increased tectonic activity and Earth's quasi-crystalline structure. It is noteworthy that expressions of symmetry with pentagonal and star-shaped forms largely define the living nature of micro and macro objects and bodies. In this respect alone, Earth can be considered a living entity. The planet's gas envelope initially consisted of hydrogen, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and inert gases. Then the atmosphere's composition changed significantly, and soon after, oxygen appeared. On land and in ancient seas and oceans, processes of sedimentary rock formation, including clay, took place. One key characteristic of clay, discussed at the Pacific Chemistry Conference in October 1977, should be highlighted. Clay along ancient seashores may have played an essential role in life's development. For example, its trace amounts of zinc and nickel chemically stimulate the formation of certain types of amino acids and nucleotides. In 1985, scientists from the Ames Research Center reported that clay possesses a unique ability to transform energy. Additionally, physical chemist Ermin Weiss of the University of Munich observed during experiments the phenomenon of crystal multiplication from a parent crystal, and even their evolution. Equally interesting findings have emerged from decades of debate on the origin of oil. In 1973, the Kudryavtsev law was formulated, stating that if oil or gas is found in one layer of sedimentary rock, it will also be found in all underlying horizons. The discovery of oil in the oldest rocks, granites, gneisses, weathering crusts of the basement rock, and directly in the crystalline basement, suggests that oil can form, and likely did form, abiotically during migration and also through thermochemical synthesis and accumulation of liquid and gaseous hydrocarbons through the Earth's crust. Drilling of deep and ultra-deep wells, 6.5 to 9.4 kilometers, revealed bituminoids and paraffin oils throughout their sections. In continental regions, geophysical methods have detected hydrocarbons at depths of 40 to 180 kilometers. Furthermore, unlike compounds of living nature, characterized by left-handed polarization, oil is 99% right-handed. Therefore, oil is predominantly of non-organic origin. Recently, the theory of cosmic panspermia has gained attention in scientific circles. It describes the possible development on Earth of primitive organisms arriving in the Earth's crust with meteorites, such as carbonaceous chondrites. Oil, which is detected nearly everywhere in space, could have served as food for these cosmic visitors. The Murchison meteorite alone contains 55 different organic amino acids preserved in bituminous material, some of which had never been found on Earth. Primitive organisms may have gradually evolved over billions of years. One of the first to propose the origin of life from oil was academician P.N. Kropotkin at the First International Conference on Life, organized by A.I. Oparin in 1957. A similar conclusion was drawn by renowned Cornell University astronomer Thomas Gold, who believes that hydrocarbons rise from depths of 150 to 300 kilometers and, through migration and thermosynthesis, at temperatures around 1,000 degrees Celsius under extreme pressure, form oil and gas and some coal deposits. Gold emphasizes the role of helium associated with oil. By examining data from several oil fields, he found evidence of underground anaerobic microorganisms' activity and subsequently discovered the organisms themselves, methanogens. According to Gold, at early stages of life's development, oil hydrocarbons could have served as food for primitive life forms preceding the photosynthesis period. Such microorganisms could have arrived on Earth with carbonaceous meteorites. As reported by Britannica, carbonaceous chondrites contain up to 1% organic substances, indicating the high efficiency of the cosmos in producing organic molecules even in the early stages of the solar system's development. It has been established that carbonaceous bodies dominate the middle and outer regions of the asteroid belt, 2.5 to 3.2 astronomical units. Thus, organic matter formed in enormous quantities in the early solar system stages. Alternatively, it remained there following the breakup of Nibiru's moons during the celestial battle, as evidenced by bacteria-like fossils found in lunar origin meteorites. According to American scientists Sears Derrick and Kyle Timothy, lunar meteorites contain precisely the same organic remnants as Martian ones. This transfer of fossils to the Moon during the celestial battle seems plausible. It should be noted that the scenario of seeding with organic matter could have taken place not only on Earth. Titan, Saturn's moon, already contains all types of light petroleum products, while Iapetus, another Saturn moon, is suspected of having similar oil pollution. Pluto, which Sumerians believed was once a moon of Saturn, also abounds in hydrocarbons. As previously mentioned, scientists hope to find extraterrestrial life on Europa, Jupiter's icy moon. In 1980, American researcher Richard Hoagland suggested in Star and Sky that life could exist and develop in Europa's subsurface ocean. Later, in December 1984, at the American Geophysical Union meeting in San Francisco, NASA Ames Research Center scientists David Reynolds and Stephen Squires proposed that warm water oases under Europa's ice crust might harbor life. Subsequent reviews of Voyager 2 photographs revealed volcanic eruptions of water and ammonia from Europa's interior. Images taken by pioneers in early 1997, in the opinion of NASA scientists, show that Europa's surface is comprised of fractured iceberg blocks floating on a warm, murky red ocean containing organic compounds and possibly primitive life forms. Follow-up 200 kilometers photos and measurements by Galileo confirmed this information and detected magnesium salts in the iceberg zones. It seems that the initial optimism in this regard remains. "I'm convinced there's life there," said John Delaney, a scientist at the University of Washington. In the context of the resurgent panspermia theory in recent years, such conclusions sound entirely plausible. Comets and meteorites, however, surprisingly, provided the strongest arguments for the cosmic theory and caused considerable turmoil among those studying the origins of life. In recent decades, increasing numbers of organic molecules have been found in comets and interstellar space. Hale-Bopp was studied thoroughly. According to Michael Mama, NASA's Goddard Space Center in Beltsville, Maryland, an infrared telescope detected ethane, acetylene, methyl alcohol, formaldehyde, methane, hydrogen cyanide, and signs of amino acids in its composition. Additionally, a new type of sodium tail was discovered. Summarizing comet studies, M. De Christina wrote, "Comets now challenge previous theories on the origin of life on Earth." The panspermia theory was first proposed in 1908 by Svante Arrhenius. Notable supporters of the idea of life spores wandering through space included famed physicist H. Helmholtz and the University of Glasgow professor Lord Kelvin. Even the Greek philosopher Anaxagoras voiced similar ideas back in 500 BC. This concept gained modern credibility from Nobel laureate Francis Crick. In his interpretation, he posited that life seeds might have been deliberately brought to Earth by an extraterrestrial civilization that could have emerged and evolved billions of years before the solar system. After all, the fact that all earthly organisms share a similar genetic code supports this hypothesis. If life arose spontaneously and in different locations, several genetic codes could have emerged. Another possible explanation is that the formation and appearance of genetic structures are controlled by an external influence, as outlined in G.B. Devoyrin's holographic theory. In 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick established that large DNA molecules consist of a double helix connected by distinctive rungs. Carl Woese of the University of Illinois dated them to 3.5 to 4 billion years. These fossil organisms were already multicellular, indicating that a significant evolutionary journey had already been completed by then. Researcher Malcolm Walter, Australia, noted in surprise that they look almost the same as modern bacteria. Yet even in single-celled organisms like Escherichia coli, there are already at least 4,000 genes. In humans, the count is much higher at 100,000. Paleontology has greatly expanded the time span for life's existence, as well as the criteria for detecting it, including morphological, biochemical, and isotope geochemical indicators. The latter two have confidently identified heterotrophic, photoautotrophic, and autotrophic organisms in Precambrian rocks, aged 0.57 to 4 billion years. Biochemical data suggest that heterotrophic organisms used organic substances already present in the environment around 4 billion years ago. Autotrophic organisms synthesize the necessary organic compounds from inorganic sources. Traces of their existence have been found in North America, South Africa, and Western Australia. In 1977, a group led by Elso Barger from Harvard discovered single-celled organisms in sedimentary rocks in South Africa, near Fig Tree in Swaziland, that were 3.4 billion years old. These were the ancestors of modern cyanobacteria. Some scientists believe that these organisms gradually evolved into multicellular life in water. In 1993, American paleontologist William Schopf found small rocks, stromatolites, in northwestern Australia, which contain remnants of 12 ancient organisms that lived 3.6 billion years ago. Hence, as soon as Earth's temperature and conditions became favorable, life immediately appeared. At that time, the atmosphere was different. The main influx of oxygen into the atmosphere, it is believed, began when algae reached land, where iron in rocks helped early organisms bind atmospheric oxygen. However, sedimentary rocks of the Isua complex in western Greenland contain clear bio- and geochemical evidence that the process of organic photosynthesis was underway 3.8 billion years ago. In 1989, Norman Sleep's group from Stanford University confirmed that the time window for life's emergence on Earth was limited to 4 to 3.8 billion years ago. The latest chemical evidence suggests that life existed on our planet 3.9 billion years ago. Thus, paleontology hits the same time mark when something happened that facilitated the emergence of biological life on Earth. Recently, the physical limits of living organisms' existence have expanded in both extreme directions. Microorganisms have been found in hot black smokers, underwater volcanoes, and in the Earth's interior at depths of 3 kilometers. High temperatures, pressure, and lack of oxygen do not impede their existence. Worms were even found in the depths of Antarctic ice, indicating that cold and darkness are no obstacles to biological life either. In Science, May 12, 1989, a summary of studies by several research groups demonstrated that, under certain conditions, some types of RNA could catalyze the formation of themselves. In subsequent computer simulations, Nobel laureate Manfred Eigen and others calculated the age of transfer RNA, establishing that the upper limit for genetic code development on Earth is 3.8 plus or minus 0.6 billion years. Eigen wrote, "If this time leans towards the plus side, which seems likely, then the only explanation is extraterrestrial origins of life." Reducing the time frame to 200 million years, particularly given the data presented at the beginning of this section, practically excludes any possibility that genetic material had sufficient time to evolve on Earth. Its cosmic origin is strongly suggested. The 1986 Berkeley, California Conference on the Origins of Life concluded with the hypothesis that all life on Earth originated from a single or similar protocell. Where did this protocell come from? Many of the 285 scientists from 22 countries believed that the influx of organic matter from space played a critical role in life's emergence. In 1987, NASA equipment recorded that supernovae expel more than 90 elements from the periodic table, including carbon, into space. Under gravitational and electromagnetic influences, this matter can coalesce, forming dense dust clouds. The existence of such clouds is evidenced by images of many galaxies seen edge-on. This dust gas matter could be the source of countless asteroidal and cometary bodies, likely concentrated in spiral arms of galaxies. Consider the contents of 400 tons of meteorites, meteorite dust, and thousands of small cometary nuclei that fall to Earth daily from space, increasing the planet's radius by 8 meters per million years. Antarctica's ice, recognized as the best storage of meteorites, has yielded over 15,000 meteorites in the past 29 years, including 11 lunar and 13 Martian meteorites. Approximately 95% of this material is represented by chondrites, 4% by achondrites, and 1% by carbonaceous chondrites, which are of the greatest interest. Meteorite collections hold about 2,400 such meteorites, with more than 50 from Antarctica. It has been confirmed that the organic matter found in them is of extraterrestrial origin. Reports of organic finds and fossil traces in meteorites date back to 1806. Though initially considered unreliable, for instance, in the 19th century, Dr. Hahn discovered and photographed fossilized shells, sponges and corals in some meteorites, which were about 10 times smaller than their earthly counterparts. The meteorite that fell in Sweden on April 11, 1925, also contained seashells and creatures resembling ancient trilobites. In August 1983, Scientific American reported that at least 3 nucleotides were found in 2 meteorites discovered in Antarctica in 1977. Radiocarbon dating of the meteorites showed they were 4.5 to 4.7 billion years old. Roy Lewis and Edward Anders described the carbonaceous chondrites as containing material foreign to the solar system, specifically matter expelled by supernovae. It was also discovered that carbonaceous chondrites contain amino acids. According to Sumerian cosmogony, Nibiru brought life to the solar system about 4 billion years ago. Organic fossils in the Efremovka and Murchison meteorites correspond to this age. Researchers found fossilized remains of cyanobacteria and fungi with complex eukaryotic cells, nearly identical to human cells. The age of these sensational meteorites is 4.5 billion years. It should be noted that Earth as we know it did not yet exist. This, along with findings in Martian meteorites by American scientists, substantially reinforces the plausibility of the panspermia idea proposed by S. Arrhenius, H. Helmholtz, V. I. Vernadsky, and L. S. Berg, suggesting that the duration of life on Earth corresponds with the age of our planet. Today, exobiology specialists explore the possibility of transporting spores through space under conditions of extremely low temperatures and exposure to various types of radiation. Experiments have shown that under favorable freezing conditions, over half of human eggs come back to life after thawing. In 1985, Nature reported that transporting spores would be possible if sealed in a body of water, methane, ammonia, and carbon monoxide. Such bodies already exist. They are meteorites, comets, and cosmic dust. As for the spore's travel speed, astrophysicist Carl Sagan's calculations suggest that, under the influence of solar radiation pressure and solar wind, Earth spores could reach Mars' vicinity within a few weeks. In the mid-1980s, French scientist M. Moret discovered cosmic particles preserved in the icy lakes of Greenland, previously part of comets, and which subsequently settled on Earth. The debate on this topic was reignited after the dramatic appearance and study of 2 bright comets, Hyakutake and Hale-Bopp, in 1996 to 1997. Many scientists nearly unanimously stated, some believe comets are essentially responsible for life on Earth. British astrophysicists F. Hoyle and C. Wickramasinghe analyzed statistics of global infectious diseases over the past centuries and proposed their cosmic origins. Comets brought certain types of viruses and microbes, which triggered synchronous epidemics among both the Yakuts and South Africans in the last century. Fred Hoyle also suggested that comets are sowers of life. The fact that complex molecules, amino acids, formed from combinations of simpler molecules in meteorites in deep space lends credence to the idea that a comet bombardment 4 billion years ago could have brought life itself. In other words, Hoyle and Wickramasinghe believed Earth became infected with life. The Stardust Project, aiming to send 6 interplanetary stations to study 6 comets and 4 asteroids between 1999 and 2003, and several other exciting early 21st century projects are expected to shed light on this question. Thus, it can be stated that the panspermia theory has recently received substantial empirical support. It is noteworthy that Sandra Blakesley's article in the New York Times on the latest data on the origin of life contains a phrase that echoes the Sumerians. Scientists believe that Earth and other planets were seeded from space with the building blocks of life. 6,000 years later, our science has arrived at similar elements from the Enuma Elish narrative. Finally, let us remember the ancient Mesopotamian Akitu festival, Akitu, derived from the Sumerian phrase Akiti, to create life on Earth. The festival reminds us that life in the solar system emerged following its encounter with the planet Nibiru/Marduk. On land, the first tubular, hollow-bodied creatures about 0.1, the thickness of a human hair, appeared approximately 1.5 to 1.2 billion years ago. This is evidenced by bacteria-like and fungal organisms discovered in Arizona and California by American paleontologists Robert Horodecki and Paul Knott. This is unsurprising if we recall the inhabitants of meteorites. The first highly developed multicellular vertebrates appeared much later, around 544 million years ago, while trees and shrubs emerged even later, around 385 million years ago. The Bible also reports that vegetation was created on the third day of creation, and God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself, upon the earth." Genesis 1:11. The appearance of vertebrates required biological clocks, that is, cycles linked to the interaction of Earth with the sun and moon. This was allocated to the third day. Modern science agrees with this. Paleontological findings between 2 billion and 570 million years ago, the Precambrian, reveal a gap, suggesting that it was during this period that biological informational rhythms were established. It is possible that the duration of Earth's day in the past was different. Studies of daily and annual carbonate deposits in coral skeletons reveal that while modern colonies show close to 360 annual layers, deeper into the past, this number increases. In the Carboniferous period, it ranged from 385 to 390, while in the Devonian it was close to 400. Consequently, during the Devonian period, a day lasted 22 hours, 263. In other words, Earth now rotates more slowly. A significant aspect of life's development on Earth is ancient glaciations, which affected virtually all continents and geological epochs. The earliest traces of glaciation are found in South Africa, dating back 2.7 billion years. The history of glaciation is divided into warming periods, thermoeras, and cooling periods, glacioeras. 5 glacioeras lasting from 100 to 300 million years are currently known. The late Cenozoic glacioera is likely still ongoing. Due to their periodicity, glaciations are considered regular stages of planetary development and serve as markers in the history of the climate. This was followed by the Paleozoic, the fourth day, the emergence of numerous plants, fish, and amphibians, 570 to 225 million years ago. The next significant period, the Mesozoic, 225 to 65 million years ago, was the age of dinosaurs. Knowledge of dinosaurs' existence among the Sumerians first came to light in the early 20th century. In 1902, the archaeologist Robert Koldewey completed excavations of the Gate of Marduk. On a portico dedicated to the goddess Ishtar, depictions of terrifying remi, biblical reem or wild oxen, and wild sirishes were discovered. In 1913, Koldewey suggested in his records that the sirish was some unknown fossil animal mentioned in Sumerian and Chaldean texts from at least 2800 to 1130 BCE. Koldewey also noted that sirish appears in the Old Testament. However, he was puzzled by the creature's limbs, powerful clawed eagle-like hind legs and small lion-like front ones. By 1918, Koldewey leaned toward the view that the sirish belonged to the ornithopod group of dinosaurs. In the recently published book Sur la piste des bêtes ignorées by Belgian zoologist B. Heuvelmans, it is suggested that this animal was a Ceratosaurus, which inhabited Central Africa. Considering the content of Mesopotamian texts and enamel artifacts resembling Babylonian relics found in the African jungles by Hans Homburg, it is conceivable that Absu housed a kind of zoo of rare animals, perhaps even astonishing hybrids. References to various dragons and terrible reptiles discovered elsewhere on Earth will be discussed in later episodes. Here, we will briefly mention several Old Testament citations. In the book of Genesis, the Hebrew translation reads, "And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, tanninim, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good." Genesis 1:20-22. In the context of creation, Mesopotamian texts refer to great reptiles, which could very well imply dinosaurs. The Hebrew term tanninim used in Genesis is the plural form of tannin, tannian, translated as sea monster, serpent, something long like a snake, and crocodile. In one Old Testament translation, this is rendered as whales, which makes sense since the compilers and translators of the scriptures had never seen such creatures and did not know what to compare them to. Theologians suggest that this description refers to plesiosaurs and mesosaurus, which inhabited Earth's waters. The term ramus means that which moves, mobile, moving. Its connotations include to glide quickly like a fish, to slip, to move with ease. The term sheretz, translated as abundantly, in abundance, literally means teeming. According to the Bible, flying creatures and land-dwelling beings appeared before dinosaurs. Oph, a collective Hebrew term, encompasses flying creatures, reptiles, birds, including domestic ones, and even flies. Thus, it refers to flying beings in general, not specifically feathered birds. Meanwhile, Encyclopaedia Britannica states that crocodiles are the last surviving link among dinosaur-like reptiles and are the closest living relatives of birds. Both lay eggs, but modern birds, unlike reptiles, are warm-blooded. Most ornithologists agree that dinosaurs are the ancestors of birds. The debates are only about whether all birds can be considered descendants of dinosaurs. True birds appeared in the late Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. Findings of the Archaeopteryx, living in the Triassic period, were widely interpreted at the time. However, fossil remains of the same creature found in Germany suggest it was already a fully developed bird that descended not from dinosaurs, but from a much more ancient ancestor that lived in the seas. Relatively recently, in 1964, evidence of velociraptors, frightening types of birds, was discovered in 2 parts of Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. In that era, their relatives included species such as Ornitholestes, Coelurus, Troodon, and others. In 1997, in the eastern Chinese province of Liaoning, well-preserved remains of the bird-like Sinosauropteryx prima were discovered. This chicken-sized creature walked on 2 short legs and was covered with something resembling fluff. It lived 120 to 140 million years ago. The idea that birds were created before dinosaurs remained under question for a long time due to large temporal gaps in stratigraphy and the possibility of new discoveries. A flying reptile living 250 million years ago, discovered in the 1920s by German paleontologist Otto Jäckel, was initially considered by him as an accidental overlaying of fragments of a fish or another reptile. The wings were discarded as irrelevant. For 70 years, no one remembered Coelurosaurus jäckeli. The remains of the same creature were rediscovered in the 1990s by Hans-Dieter Suess, who restored historical justice regarding the most remarkable 4-legged lizard in Earth's history. However, the key takeaway is that this discovery confirms the words of the Bible. It was established that Coelurosaurus became extinct about 250 million years ago, 25 million years before the age of dinosaurs. According to Suess, these flying amphibians became extinct due to some global cataclysm. Such cataclysms occurred many times in Earth's history. For instance, black layers of dead algae in Devonian sedimentary rocks indicate a catastrophic oxygen deficit that led to the death of most organisms of that time. During the Cretaceous period, almost all organisms, including simple foraminifera and even a significant portion of insects, perished on a planetary scale. At least 3 periods in the late Paleozoic, 250, 220, and 66 million years ago, are known, during which 50 to 95% of all living organisms disappeared. The idea of cosmic catastrophism as the driving force behind the development and changes in Earth's biosphere was first proposed in 1812 by French scientist Georges Cuvier and substantiated in his works Research on Fossil Bones and Discourses on the Revolutions on the Surface of the Globe and the Changes They Produced in the Animal Kingdom. One such catastrophe, occurring around 250 million years ago, was studied in detail by American geologist Thomas Algeo from the University of Cincinnati. At that time, up to 96% of all species of marine organisms perished almost instantly. The likely cause was the massive outpouring of lava from Earth's interior. Additionally, at least 7 other cases of mass extinction of living organisms are known, involving 20 to 50% of all species. Peaks of such extinctions correlate well with crater formation epochs, with a periodicity of 27 to 28 million years. Thus, the causes of dramatic cataclysms lie in the depths of space. Experts estimate that the number of collisions between Earth and large or medium crater-forming celestial bodies exceeds 1 million. Through his research, American paleontologist D. Dorr highlighted about 40 meteorite comet catastrophes that led to mass extinctions of living organisms. He identified 15 impact craters in North America, 3 in Africa, 19 in Eurasia, and 1 each in Australia and Antarctica. Adding to the sad list of known dates, he noted a period 368 million years ago when a meteorite struck north of present-day Stockholm, destroying about 2/3 of all life on Earth, including terrestrial creatures, coral reefs, and many species of marine fish and animals. Recently, a group of scientists from Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque proposed the theory of an asteroid impact in the Northern Hemisphere, where seismic waves, focused by Earth like a lens in the Southern Hemisphere, caused a magma eruption that lasted hundreds of thousands of years. According to researchers, during this time, India's Deccan Plateau formed, a lake of solidified lava 2 kilometers thick and the size of Germany. It has been established that approximately 66.4 million years ago, the era of dinosaurs abruptly ended. The mystery of the extinction of such mighty animals has long intrigued biologists, paleontologists, and geologists over 2 centuries, resulting in numerous hypotheses. The debates are only about whether all birds can be considered descendants of dinosaurs. True birds appeared in the late Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. Findings of the Archaeopteryx, living in the Triassic period, were widely interpreted at the time. However, fossil remains of the same creature found in Germany suggest it was already a fully developed bird that descended not from dinosaurs, but from a much more ancient ancestor that lived in the seas. Relatively recently, in 1964, evidence of velociraptors, frightening types of birds, was discovered in 2 parts of Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park. In that era, their relatives included species such as Ornitholestes, Coelurus, Troodon, and others. In 1997, in the eastern Chinese province of Liaoning, well-preserved remains of the bird-like Sinosauropteryx prima were discovered. This chicken-sized creature walked on 2 short legs and was covered with something resembling fluff. It lived 120 to 140 million years ago. The idea that birds were created before dinosaurs remained under question for a long time due to large temporal gaps in stratigraphy and the possibility of new discoveries. A flying reptile living 250 million years ago, discovered in the 1920s by German paleontologist Otto Jäckel, was initially considered by him as an accidental overlaying of fragments of a fish or another reptile. The wings were discarded as irrelevant. For 70 years, no one remembered Coelurosaurus jäckeli. The remains of the same creature were rediscovered in the 1990s by Hans-Dieter Suess, who restored historical justice regarding the most remarkable 4-legged lizard in Earth's history. However, the key takeaway is that this discovery confirms the words of the Bible. It was established that Coelurosaurus became extinct about 250 million years ago, 25 million years before the age of dinosaurs. According to Suess, these flying amphibians became extinct due to some global cataclysm. Such cataclysms occurred many times in Earth's history. For instance, black layers of dead algae in Devonian sedimentary rocks indicate a catastrophic oxygen deficit that led to the death of most organisms of that time. During the Cretaceous period, almost all organisms, including simple foraminifera and even a significant portion of insects, perished on a planetary scale. At least 3 periods in the late Paleozoic, 250, 220, and 66 million years ago, are known, during which 50 to 95% of all living organisms disappeared. The idea of cosmic catastrophism as the driving force behind the development and changes in Earth's biosphere was first proposed in 1812 by French scientist Georges Cuvier and substantiated in his works Research on Fossil Bones and Discourses on the Revolutions on the Surface of the Globe and the Changes They Produced in the Animal Kingdom. One such catastrophe, occurring around 250 million years ago, was studied in detail by American geologist Thomas Algeo from the University of Cincinnati. At that time, up to 96% of all species of marine organisms perished almost instantly. The likely cause was the massive outpouring of lava from Earth's interior. Additionally, at least 7 other cases of mass extinction of living organisms are known, involving 20 to 50% of all species. Peaks of such extinctions correlate well with crater formation epochs, with a periodicity of 27 to 28 million years. Thus, the causes of dramatic cataclysms lie in the depths of space. Experts estimate that the number of collisions between Earth and large or medium crater-forming celestial bodies exceeds 1 million. Through his research, American paleontologist D. Dorr highlighted about 40 meteorite comet catastrophes that led to mass extinctions of living organisms. He identified 15 impact craters in North America, 3 in Africa, 19 in Eurasia, and 1 each in Australia and Antarctica. Adding to the sad list of known dates, he noted a period 368 million years ago when a meteorite struck north of present-day Stockholm, destroying about 2/3 of all life on Earth, including terrestrial creatures, coral reefs, and many species of marine fish and animals. Recently, a group of scientists from Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque proposed the theory of an asteroid impact in the Northern Hemisphere, where seismic waves, focused by Earth like a lens in the Southern Hemisphere, caused a magma eruption that lasted hundreds of thousands of years. According to researchers, during this time, India's Deccan Plateau formed, a lake of solidified lava 2 kilometers thick and the size of Germany. It has been established that approximately 66.4 million years ago, the era of dinosaurs abruptly ended. The mystery of the extinction of such mighty animals has long intrigued biologists, paleontologists, and geologists over 2 centuries, resulting in numerous hypotheses. These include theories of nemesis, supernova explosions, heat waves, ice ages, the solar system passing through specific zones of the galaxy, sabotage by small mammals, infectious diseases, changes in Earth's flora, and many others. The hypothesis proposed in 1980 by Nobel laureate physicist Luis Alvarez regarding an asteroid impact on Earth proved highly convincing, although initially criticized by geologists. According to his calculations, a planetoid at least 10 kilometers in diameter and about 1 trillion tons in mass entered Earth's atmosphere at a speed of approximately 20 kilometers per second. Alvarez theorized that this asteroid struck the Gulf of Mexico's coast into sulfur-rich rocks, releasing not only dense clouds of dust, smoke, and aerosols, but also poisonous sulfur gases. These, in turn, caused deadly acid rains. Despite the dramatic nature of this event, it is undeniable that millions of years later, mammals rose to the top of the animal kingdom. The hypothesis of a cosmic cause for this catastrophe has recently gained confirmation. However, evidence existed earlier. In the 1970s, Walter Alvarez discovered anomalous, 20 times or more above normal, concentrations of rare earth metal iridium at the boundary of Cretaceous and Quaternary deposits. It turned out that clayey rocks with unusually high iridium content are nearly ubiquitous. Moreover, specialists believe that iridium originated from cosmic dust. These clays also contained amino acids rarely found in terrestrial rocks, but typical of carbonaceous chondrites. The discovered layer strongly correlates with global cooling and mass extinction events. In the 1980s, several reports of a similar nature appeared in scientific periodicals. For instance, in 1984, A. Hildebrand identified two large crater astroblems in the Caribbean. Later, in Colombia's coastal zone, he discovered an alien body approximately 300 kilometers in diameter, embedded in Earth's crust. Irium-rich fragments of the asteroid were also found south of Haiti, near the western tip of Cuba. In 1993, drilling 2,000 kilometers northwest of Japan revealed spinel grains with high iridium content in rocks about 65 million years old. It is possible that one fragment of the asteroid fell into the Pacific Ocean. Very recently, an international team of scientists led by Richard Norris, collecting samples from the ocean floor off Florida's eastern coast, found physical traces and evidence of this cataclysm. A drill lowered to a depth of 2.5 kilometers and boring about 100 meters of rock layers enabled the reconstruction of events in the Gulf of Mexico basin. The scenario of the catastrophe appears as follows. Approximately 66.4 million years ago, an asteroid about 20 kilometers in diameter struck the Yucatan Peninsula, forming the Chicxulub crater with a diameter of 140 kilometers. Billions of tons of fine particles rich in iridium were ejected into Earth's atmosphere. Analysis of drilling cores shows that this region was teeming with life before the catastrophe. Above the organic-rich layer lies a layer of glassy granules, remnants of material vaporized upon the asteroid's impact. Higher still is a layer of brown ash, ejected material that subsequently settled on the ground. The explosion produced a deadly shockwave of tremendous power, along with tsunamis and a fragmentary meteorite rain. The opaque dust cloud that enveloped the planet drastically altered the climate. According to scientists, about 70% of living organisms perished, and no creature larger than 25 kilograms survived. Up to 87% of foraminifera, ammonites, coccolithophores, plankton, sponges, brachiopods, and other representatives of marine fauna, as well as freshwater fish and plants, were also wiped out. This dead season lasted approximately 5,000 years. After this period, mammals gained dominance over the planet, and according to the Bible, the sixth day of creation began. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living soul according to its kind, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kind." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kind, and the cattle according to their kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. Genesis 1:24. While proclaiming humanity's dominion over all other animals, the Old Testament does not state that humans were the earliest creation. On the contrary, it asserts that their appearance marks merely the final chapters of Earth's history. The Sumerians believed that the Anunnaki engineered humans, Adam and Eve, only after everything else was created. Only then was the process of creation completed. Thanks for watching. We will try and get the rest of this story finished in the next month or two.